Hey everyone, welcome back. As always, we're building in Minecraft while I tell you about someone who found messages on their boyfriend's phone that weren't just suspicious, they were about planning her death. And here's the thing, this isn't just one story tonight. We've got a whole lineup of people who thought they were untouchable, right up until the evidence landed in someone else's hands. Betrayals that started small and snowballed, lies that lasted years, and the kind of revenge that doesn't need to be loud to absolutely destroy someone. Alright, before we dive in, huge shout out to everyone who's been showing up, dropping comments, and showing love to the channel. You guys are amazing, and your support means the world. So now let's dive in. I thought I knew Tyler, like, really knew him. We'd been together for 3 years, living in this tiny apartment in Portland with questionable plumbing and a landlord who thought fixing things was optional. We had plans, real ones. We talk about getting a dog, maybe moving somewhere with actual closet space, the kind of boring domestic future that feels safe and warm when you're in love. Then his phone buzzed while he was in the shower. I wasn't trying to snoop. I need you to understand that. The phone was just sitting there on the coffee table, screen lighting up with a preview notification, and I glanced at it the way you do when something moves in your peripheral vision. The message was from his brother Derek. It said, "She doesn't suspect anything, just a few more months." My stomach dropped. Just a few more months until what? I sat there frozen for a second, trying to rationalize it. Maybe they were planning a surprise party. Maybe they were working on some kind of gift. But the phrasing felt wrong. Too secretive. Too careful. Tyler had never changed his passcode. It was still our anniversary. I unlocked the phone with shaking hands, telling myself I'd find something innocent and feel stupid for doubting him. I opened the messages with Derek. What I found wasn't another woman. It was worse, so much worse. Dozens of messages, weeks of them, and they were all about me, about life insurance policies in my name, policies I didn't even know existed. They were discussing amounts, beneficiaries, payout timelines. Then came the part that made my blood turn to ice. Plans to make my accident look natural. They'd discussed everything. A fall down the stairs, a car malfunction, something with carbon monoxide that I didn't fully understand because my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. There were detailed timelines, specific dates. They'd planned this down to the week. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because trust me, this is just the beginning of tonight's ride. Now, where was I? Oh, right, I was staring at my own death being planned in text messages. I couldn't breathe. I just sat there on our couch, the same couch where we'd watched movies and fallen asleep together, reading message after message about how to kill me and make it look like an accident. My boyfriend, the person I trusted more than anyone, the person I'd built a life with. I could hear the shower still running. He was in there, probably humming or doing whatever normal thing he did, completely unaware that I'd just discovered he was planning to murder me. My first instinct was to run, just grab my keys and go. But something stopped me. Maybe it was shock, maybe it was survival instinct kicking in. I started screenshotting everything, every single message. My fingers were trembling so badly I had to redo some of them. But I got them all. Dozens of screenshots. I sent them to myself, then deleted the evidence that I'd sent anything. I forwarded them to my email as a backup. Then I did something that probably saved my life. I called my sister. My sister Lauren is a prosecutor. She's the kind of person who stays calm in a crisis, which is exactly what I needed because I was about 10 seconds from a full panic attack. I whispered everything to her while keeping one eye on the bathroom door. She didn't waste time with disbelief or questions. She just said, "Get out of there right now. Don't confront him. Don't let him know you know. Just leave." So I did. I grabbed my purse, my laptop, and the spare car keys. I didn't pack a bag, didn't leave a note. I just walked out of that apartment like I was going to the grocery store, got in my car, and drove straight to Lauren's house across town. The whole drive, I kept checking my rearview mirror, like Tyler might somehow already know and be following me. Lauren called the police before I even got there. By the time I arrived, she'd already forwarded my screenshots to a detective she knew. Things moved fast after that. Faster than I thought possible. Then came the breaking point. The police wanted to move immediately. They were worried that if Tyler realized I knew, he might accelerate his plan or destroy evidence. So they set up a sting. They had me text Tyler from Lauren's phone, something casual about running errands and coming home later. He responded with a heart emoji. An actual heart emoji. The man planning to kill me sent me a heart emoji. The police went to his office just before noon. I wasn't there, but Lauren told me later that Tyler had apparently been sitting at his desk, eating lunch, completely normal. They arrested him right there in front of his co-workers, searched his computer and found even more evidence. Searches for untraceable poisons, forums about staging accidents. He'd been researching this for months. Here's where it gets even darker. The why behind it all. Turns out Derek, Tyler's brother, had gambling debts, serious ones, the kind that involve actual dangerous people making actual threats. And Tyler, my loving boyfriend, had decided that solving his brother's problem was worth more than my life. He'd taken out life insurance policies on me without my knowledge, forging my signature, listing himself as the beneficiary. The payout was substantial, enough to clear Derek's debts and then some. I was worth more dead than alive. That's what it came down to. 3 years of relationship, of building a life together, of me trusting him completely, and I was just a financial solution to him. The worst part? And yes, somehow there's a worse part. When the police searched our apartment, they found a calendar in Tyler's desk drawer. He'd marked a date in red, about 6 weeks out. Just a red X. No note, no explanation needed. That was the day. That was when he'd planned to do it. I'd had 6 weeks left and I didn't even know it. The evidence was overwhelming. The messages, the forged insurance documents, the search history, the calendar. Tyler's lawyer tried to claim it was all just dark jokes between brothers, that they never actually planned to do anything. But you can't explain away that much detail as a joke. You can't accidentally research staging fatal accidents for months. Derek got arrested too. Turned out he'd been actively encouraging Tyler, pushing him to go through with it. They'd even discussed splitting the insurance money differently at one point. There were messages where Derek complained that Tyler was taking too long, that he needed the money sooner. These people had discussed my murder the way normal people discuss splitting a dinner bill. The trial starts next month. Both of them are being charged with conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and a bunch of other things I can't even keep track of. My lawyer says the case is solid. The prosecutor, who's not my sister because conflict of interest, says she's never seen such clear premeditation. I've had to move. Obviously, I don't live in that apartment anymore. I can't even drive past that neighborhood without feeling sick. I'm staying with Lauren while I figure out my next steps. Therapy is helping, kind of. My therapist says I'm doing remarkably well considering I discovered my boyfriend was planning to kill me, but I don't feel remarkably well. I feel like I'm constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. I look at people differently now. Every relationship feels suspect. Every kind gesture feels like it might be hiding something sinister. My friends have been amazing, but there's this distance now. They don't know what to say to someone who almost got murdered by the person they loved. What's the greeting card for that? The thing that haunts me most isn't even the plan itself. It's how normal everything seemed. Right up until that phone buzzed, I thought we were happy. I thought Tyler loved me. I thought we had a future. He'd kissed me goodbye that morning before work, made coffee the way I liked it. We'd talked about maybe getting a cat. And the entire time he was counting down the days until he could kill me. You almost have to admire the audacity. Actually, no. You don't. There's nothing admirable about planning to murder someone who trusts you, but the sheer calculated coldness of it, the way he could look me in the eye and pretend everything was fine while plotting my death. That's a level of sociopathy I didn't think existed outside of true crime documentaries. People keep asking me how I'm doing, and I never know how to answer. I'm alive, which is more than I would have been in 6 weeks if I hadn't seen that message. But I'm not okay. I don't know if I'll ever be okay. How do you recover from learning that the person you loved, the person you trusted with everything, saw you as nothing more than an insurance payout? I testified at the preliminary hearing last week. Had to sit in the same room as Tyler for the first time since that day. He wouldn't look at me. Just stared at the table the whole time. His lawyer tried to paint me as paranoid, suggested I'd misinterpreted innocent messages. But the insurance documents don't lie. The search history doesn't lie. The calendar with the red X doesn't lie. The trial's going to be hard. I'll have to relive all of this in front of a jury, explain how I unlocked his phone, detail every horrible message I found. But I'll do it, because Tyler and Derek need to face consequences for what they planned, for what they almost did, and because somewhere out there, maybe there's another person whose partner is plotting something terrible, and they need to know that it's okay to look, to question, to trust your instincts when something feels wrong. That notification saved my life. My instinct to check saved my life. I'm not the same person I was 3 months ago. That version of me died in a way, even if I'm still breathing. But I'm building something new, something harder, something that won't be so easy to destroy. The trial starts next month, and I'll be there, alive and ready to tell the truth about what they planned. They wanted me silent and gone. Instead, I'm here and I'm loud and I'm making sure everyone knows exactly what they are. But you know what's almost as disturbing as planning someone's death, being erased from someone's life while you're still standing right there. I'd been dating Maya for 18 months when this happened. 18 months of what I thought was a pretty solid relationship. We weren't just casually seeing each other anymore either. We'd moved in together 6 months prior, splitting rent on a small studio downtown. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Or at least I thought it was ours. My name was on the lease. My furniture filled most of the space. My books were on the shelves. My coffee maker sat on the counter. This was home. I'd been away on a work trip for about 4 days, one of those tedious regional conferences where you sit through presentations you could have gotten in an email and make small talk with people you'll never see again. The kind of trip that makes you appreciate what you have back home. I was supposed to fly back on Saturday evening, but my flight got moved up. Some scheduling change, I don't remember the details. Point is, I was coming home Friday night instead, a full day early, and I was actually excited about it. I hadn't told Maya about the change because I thought it'd be a nice surprise. Maybe we'd order takeout, watch something terrible on Netflix, just decompress together. That was the plan. I unlocked the door around 8:30 and immediately knew something was off. The lights were dimmed, there were candles everywhere, the expensive kind Maya usually saved for special occasions. I could hear laughter coming from inside, multiple voices, and music playing softly in the background. For a second I thought maybe she was throwing me a surprise party, which would have been weird since my birthday wasn't for months, but I couldn't think of another explanation. I walked in and the scene was like something out of a lifestyle magazine. Maya had set up our tiny dining table with actual place settings, cloth napkins, wine glasses. There were 4 people sitting around it, mid-conversation, mid-laugh. The apartment smelled like the pasta dish Maya made when she was trying to impress someone. Everything looked perfect, warm, inviting. And then Maya looked up and saw me standing there in the doorway with my suitcase and carry-on bag. Her face went completely blank. Not surprised, not happy to see me. Just frozen. Like her brain had blue-screened and she was trying to reboot. The conversation at the table died. Everyone turned to look at me. I did that awkward half-wave thing you do when you walk into a room and don't know what else to do with your hands. That's when Maya said it. She cleared her throat, smiled this tight, weird smile, and said to her guests, "Oh, this is my cousin Jake. He's visiting." My cousin Jake. I stood there with my keys still in my hand. In my own apartment, next to my own couch, underneath a framed poster I'd hung myself 3 months ago, and my girlfriend of 18 months had just introduced me as her cousin to a table full of strangers. Her friends didn't even blink. One of them, a woman in a burgundy sweater, just smiled and said, "Oh, how nice, family visiting." Another guy raised his wine glass slightly in my direction, like a casual greeting. They all just accepted it. Cousin Jake, visiting, sure. I should have said something right then. I should have corrected her. I should have asked what the hell was happening. But I didn't. I was too stunned. My brain was doing this frantic calculation, trying to figure out if maybe I'd misunderstood, if maybe this was some kind of joke I wasn't in on, if maybe I'd walked into the wrong apartment even though my key had literally just opened the door. So I just stood there like an idiot and played along. I mumbled something about not wanting to interrupt, said it was nice to meet everyone, and walked straight to the bedroom. I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, still holding my suitcase, trying to process what had just happened. I could hear them out there, the conversation picking back up, laughter resuming like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just been erased from my own life in a single sentence. This is where it gets absurd. I stayed in that bedroom for 2 hours. 2 full hours while Maya entertained her guests in the living room of our shared apartment. I unpacked my bag mechanically, took a shower, changed into sweatpants, and just waited. At some point, I heard the dinner party winding down. Goodbyes at the door, promises to do it again soon. The sound of Maya cleaning up, dishes clinking in the sink. When she finally came into the bedroom, I was sitting on the bed with my laptop open, pretending to answer emails. She stood in the doorway wringing her hands, looking like she wanted to say something but couldn't figure out how to start. I didn't help her. I just waited. Let the silence stretch out until it got uncomfortable. Finally, she said, "I can explain." I closed my laptop. "Yeah, I'd love to hear this." She sat down on the opposite end of the bed, not looking at me, and started talking. At first, it was the story I'd half expected. She said she'd been telling her family we were just roommates, not dating. Her parents were traditional, she said, conservative. They'd threatened to disown her if she moved in with a boyfriend before marriage. She was terrified of losing them, of being cut off, so she'd lied, told them we were platonic roommates splitting rent. I'd never met her parents, never been invited to family events, and now I understood why. I could have maybe understood that part. It would have hurt, sure, but families are complicated. I get it. But then she kept talking. "So tonight," she said, still not looking at me, "I just panicked when you walked in. I didn't know what to say." I stared at her. "Who were those people, Maya?" She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "Co-workers," she finally admitted. "From my department. Not family friends, not relatives who might report back to her parents. Co-workers. People who had absolutely nothing to do with her family situation. People she saw every single day at the office. "So you're telling me," I said slowly, "that you've been lying to your coworkers too, about me, about us?" She started crying, full tears, mascara running, the whole performance. She tried to explain that it was complicated, that people at work were judgmental, that she didn't want them knowing her personal business, that it was easier to just keep things separate. But that wasn't even the worst part. As she kept talking, trying to justify it, I started putting pieces together. All those times she'd said she couldn't bring me to work events because they were boring. All those happy hours she'd gone to alone. That company holiday party she told me was employees only. She hadn't been protecting her privacy. She'd been ashamed of me. I asked her point blank, "Are you embarrassed to be with me?" She didn't answer right away, which was an answer in itself. "It's not like that," she finally said, which is what people say when it's exactly like that. I stood up and started grabbing things, clothes from the dresser, toiletries from the bathroom, my laptop charger. I wasn't even thinking clearly, just moving on autopilot, shoving stuff into my suitcase while Maya sat on the bed, crying and asking me to please just listen, please just give her a chance to explain. It wasn't what I thought, but it was exactly what I thought. She'd been hiding me, not from some strict conservative parents who might have disowned her. From everyone, from her whole life. I was her dirty little secret, the boyfriend she kept in a studio apartment and never acknowledged in public. Cousin Jake, visiting. That's what I was to her. I told her I was staying somewhere else for the night. She begged me not to go, promised we could talk it through, promised she'd fix it, promised it would never happen again. I told her I needed space, grabbed my stuff, and left. I ended up at my actual cousin's place, which felt like the universe had a sense of humor about the whole situation. My cousin Dave lives across town in a 2-bedroom he barely uses since he travels for work. He took one look at me standing in his hallway with a suitcase at 11 at night and just said, "Spare room's yours as long as you need it." That was 3 weeks ago. Maya's been texting constantly. Long paragraphs apologizing, explaining, begging for another chance. She says she's going to tell everyone the truth, that she's going to introduce me properly to her coworkers, that she'll even tell her parents. She says she's changed. She says she realizes what she lost. I haven't responded to a single message. Because here's the thing that I keep coming back to. She had 18 months to be proud of me. 18 months to introduce me as her boyfriend, instead of hiding me like some shameful secret. And she never did. Not once. It took me walking in on her dinner party and being demoted to visiting cousin for her to suddenly realize that maybe, just maybe, that wasn't okay. The irony really isn't lost on me. I'm staying with my actual cousin. the one who didn't hesitate to help me when I needed it, while my ex-girlfriend texts me about how she wishes she'd treated me like family. You almost have to admire the audacity. Not in a good way, in that stunned, can't look away from the disaster kind of way. She really sat there at that dinner table, looked me in the eyes, and called me her cousin, in my own apartment, and expected that to just be fine. I'm not going back. Dave says I can stay as long as I need to, and honestly, I might take him up on that for a while. The lease on the studio is in my name, so Maya's going to have to figure that out. Maybe she can tell her co-workers her cousin moved out. I'm sure she'll think of something. She's good at lying, apparently. Had a lot of practice. Speaking of family secrets that rewrite your entire reality, imagine discovering your whole childhood was built on a carefully maintained lie. I was helping Mum clean the attic on a random Saturday in March. You know how it goes. She'd been talking about decluttering for months, and I finally had a free weekend. So I figured why not be a good son and help her sort through decades of accumulated stuff. Boxes of old Christmas decorations, clothes that hadn't fit anyone since the 90s, random kitchen appliances that probably didn't even work anymore. Then I found her high school yearbook, class of 1994. The cover was that weird marbled purple and gold design that every yearbook seemed to have back then. I pulled it out, curious, figured I'd get a laugh out of seeing Mum with her teenage hair and questionable fashion choices. I flipped through the pages, looking for her senior photo, finding candid shots of her in the drama club, at pep rallies, all the standard high school stuff. Then I got to the autograph pages in the back. Most of them were the usual. Have a great summer. Stay cool. Hags, which apparently meant have a great summer but looked vaguely insulting. Generic friend stuff. Then I saw one that made me stop breathing. The handwriting was distinctive, kind of messy but deliberate. It said, "To my forever love, we'll tell them someday. I promise. Love always, M. Marcus. Uncle Marcus. My uncle who wasn't actually my uncle but my mom's childhood friend. The guy who lived 2 streets over in the same neighborhood I grew up in. The one who'd been at every single birthday party, every holiday dinner, every major life event I'd ever had. The man who looked exactly like me. And I mean exactly. Same dark hair that curled just slightly at the ends. Same nose, same smile. Same weird thing where our left eyebrow sat just a bit higher than the right. People had joked about it my whole life. Oh, you must have gotten that from Marcus's side of the family. Except Marcus wasn't family. He was just Mum's friend. That's what everyone always said. I stood there in the attic, dust particles floating in the sunlight coming through the small window, holding this yearbook and feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath me. I went downstairs. Mum was in the kitchen making tea, humming to herself, completely unaware that I'd just found a bomb in her high school yearbook. I put the yearbook on the counter, opened it to that page, pointed at the message. I said, "What is this?" Mum looked at it. Her face went white, like all the blood just drained out of it in 1 second. She grabbed the edge of the counter to steady herself. She said, "Where did you find that?" I said, "The attic." "What does it mean?" She didn't answer, just stared at the yearbook like it might explode. I said, "Mum, what does it mean? Why did Marcus write that he's your forever love? Why did he say you'd tell them someday?" That's when everything unraveled. Mom kind of collapsed into one of the kitchen chairs. Not dramatically. Just this slow, defeated sink into the seat, like all the strength went out of her legs. She put her face in her hands, and then she told me everything. She'd gotten pregnant senior year of high school, with Marcus's baby, with me. They'd been dating since sophomore year, apparently. Deeply in love, the way teenagers are when they think their relationship is the most important thing in the universe. Her parents found out about the pregnancy and lost their minds. This was 1994 in a small conservative town. Her parents were pillars of the community, church every Sunday. Reputation was everything. A teenage pregnancy was a scandal they couldn't handle. So they did what controlling parents do. They made a plan. My grandfather, who died when I was 12 and who I have mostly fond memories of, apparently gave Mom 2 options. Get rid of the baby or marry someone respectable and pretend the baby was his. Marcus wasn't an option. Marcus was from the wrong family, didn't have prospects, wasn't good enough for their daughter in their eyes. He was just the artist kid who worked part-time at the record store. But there was another option. My dad. The man I've called Dad my entire life. He was a friend of the family, 24 years old, stable job at the bank, safe, boring, but safe. And apparently he'd had a crush on my mum for years. Mum's parents approached him, explained the situation, asked if he'd be willing to marry their daughter and raise the baby as his own, and he said yes. I'm going to repeat that because I'm still processing it. He said yes. He agreed to marry a teenager he barely knew and raise another man's child just because her parents asked him to. They got married 3 months later. Small ceremony. Mum was barely showing. Everyone bought the story that they'd been secretly dating and decided to elope. The town gossips whispered, obviously, but there was no proof, and by the time I was born 7 months after the wedding, enough time had passed that people could pretend I was premature and legitimate. Marcus was devastated. Mum told me he wanted to fight for her, wanted to be a father to me, but her parents threatened him. Told him if he tried to claim paternity or interfere, they'd make sure he was run out of town. Small town politics. They had the power to do it, so Marcus stayed close the only way he could. He became the family friend. Uncle Marcus. Not a real uncle, just close enough to be around. He watched me grow up from 2 streets away, came to every birthday party, every school play, every baseball game. He was there for all of it, pretending to be the quirky family friend when he was actually my father watching his son grow up and not being able to claim him. But that wasn't even the worst part. Dad knew. The man I called Dad, the man who raised me, who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and paid for college. He knew the entire time. He'd always known. He married Mom knowing she was pregnant with another man's baby. He raised me knowing I wasn't biologically his, and he never told me. I sat there in the kitchen listening to Mum explain all this, and I felt like I was in a different reality. Nothing made sense. My entire life was a carefully constructed story. Every interaction I'd ever had with Marcus was a lie. Every moment with Dad was built on a secret. I asked Mom if Dad loved her. She said yes, in his way, that he'd always loved her, even when she didn't love him back. That over the years they'd built something like affection, something like partnership, but it was never the passionate love she'd had with Marcus. I asked if she still loved Marcus. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, I never stopped. This is where patience finally snapped. I asked why Marcus was still around, why he'd stayed in our lives all these years, why he didn't just leave, start over somewhere else, find someone new. Mum said he'd tried. He'd moved away twice, once when I was 5, once when I was 13, but he always came back. He couldn't stay away. Watching me from a distance was better than not seeing me at all. And then she said something that made me want to scream. She said that she and Marcus had stayed in contact this whole time, that they still saw each other. Not romantically, she claimed, but they met for coffee sometimes, talked, shared stories about me that Marcus couldn't share with anyone else because he had to pretend he was just a family friend. Dad knew about this too. He'd allowed it. Some kind of unspoken arrangement where Marcus got to orbit our family and Dad got to actually be my father. I left, just walked out of the kitchen, got in my car, and drove. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to not be in that house. I ended up at Marcus's place. I'd been there a million times. Birthday parties, barbecues, random visits. His house always felt comfortable, familiar. Now it felt like a crime scene. I knocked. He answered, took one look at my face and said, You know. I said, Yeah, I know. We sat in his living room, the same living room where I'd played video games as a kid, where I'd hung out as a teenager. He tried to explain, tried to tell me how much he'd wanted to be my real dad, how hard it was to watch from the sidelines, how many times he'd almost told me the truth. I asked him why he didn't. He said because it would have destroyed the family, because Dad had been good to me, had loved me, and Marcus didn't want to take that away. Because my grandparents had threatened legal action if he ever revealed the truth while they were alive. They died 5 years ago. He could have told me then. He said he was going to. He'd planned to, but every time he tried to work up the courage, he'd imagine my reaction and lose his nerve. At least he got that part right. My reaction is not great. I haven't spoken to any of them in 3 weeks. Not Mom, not Dad, not Marcus. I can't. Every time I think about calling, about trying to process this, I just get angry all over again. Marcus has been texting. He wants to build a relationship, wants to be the father he never got to be. Like we can just skip past 32 years of lies and start fresh. Mum keeps calling, leaving voicemails about how sorry she is, how she was young and scared, how her parents controlled everything. She wants forgiveness, wants me to understand. Dad sent one email, just said he loves me, that nothing's changed as far as he's concerned, that he's still my father in every way that matters. He wants things to go back to normal. Back to normal. Like normal is even an option anymore. I want a time machine. I want to go back to the version of my life where my family was simple and straightforward and exactly what it appeared to be. Where dad was my dad, mum was my mum, and Marcus was just the quirky family friend who showed up to everything. My therapist, who I started seeing 2 weeks ago because clearly I need professional help processing this nightmare, wants me to take it slow. Don't make any big decisions. Feel my feelings. Process the grief of losing the family narrative I thought I had. I'm 32 years old and I just learned my entire life is a cover story. Every family photo is a staged production. Every holiday dinner was everyone performing their roles. Dad playing the father, Marcus playing the friend, Mum playing the dutiful wife, and me, the only one who didn't know I was in a play. The thing that gets me most is the coordination it took, the decades of secret keeping. How many times did they almost slip? How many conversations did they have about me where they had to be careful about what they said and who was listening? How many times did Marcus want to tell me he was proud of me and had to settle for, "Your dad must be so proud"? How many times did Dad look at me and see Marcus instead of himself? I look exactly like Marcus. Everyone always said so. "Oh, you look just like Marcus." Isn't that funny? And everyone knew why except me. The joke was on me my entire life. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I can forgive them. Any of them. I don't know if I want Marcus in my life as my father, or if that ship sailed 32 years ago. I don't know if I can look at Dad the same way knowing he's not my biological father, but chose to raise me anyway. Maybe that makes him more of a father, not less. I don't know. I can't think straight. All I know is that 3 weeks ago I had a normal family and a normal life. Now I have a biological father who's been pretending to be a family friend, a mother who's been lying to me since birth, and a dad who's been keeping the biggest secret of my life to protect everyone but me. And somewhere in an attic, there's a yearbook with a message that says, "We'll tell them someday." Well, someday finally came, and it's exactly as messy as Marcus probably feared it would be. Family secrets have a way of multiplying, and sometimes they detonate in the most public way possible. My brother Derek's baby shower was supposed to be a celebration, like an actual joyful event where people eat tiny sandwiches and play ridiculous games and pretend to be excited about receiving the 40th pack of newborn diapers. Derek and his wife Chelsea were 8 months along with their first kid, and our mum had insisted on hosting this whole thing at her house. She'd gone all out, decorations everywhere, a dessert table that looked like something from Pinterest, the works. Mum had planned a bunch of games, because apparently you can't have a baby shower without forcing adults to do weird activities. The main one she was excited about was this guess the parent thing, where you match baby photos to either Derek or Chelsea. Figure out which traits the baby might inherit, that kind of stuff. She'd asked both of them to bring childhood photos weeks in advance. Here's where I come in. Mom had also asked me to dig through the family albums and find some good pictures of Derek as a baby. I spent like an hour going through these old photo boxes in her attic, pulling out pictures, trying to find clear ones that actually showed what Derek looked like as an infant. I grabbed maybe 5 or 6 photos that I thought were him and brought them downstairs. The shower was packed. Chelsea's whole family was there. Derek's friends from work, cousins I hadn't seen in years. Everyone crammed into Mum's living room with plates of finger food, drinking punch out of fancy glasses, doing that polite small talk thing people do at these events. When it came time for the game, Mum spread out all the baby photos on the coffee table. Maybe 15 pictures total. Some were clearly Chelsea, this blonde, chubby baby with a big smile. Others were supposed to be Derek. Mum had printed out a couple of ultrasound images from Chelsea's recent appointments too, to make it more interactive or whatever. Chelsea's mom, Linda, was the first one to really examine the photos. She picked up one of the pictures I'd brought and held it next to the ultrasound. "Oh my God," she said, laughing. "That looks exactly like the ultrasound." Look at the nose, the shape of the face. Everyone gathered around to look. People were nodding, agreeing, saying how crazy it was that you could see the resemblance already. Chelsea smiled, rubbing her belly, looking pleased. Derek had his arm around her, grinning like the proud dad he was about to be. Then my cousin Sarah picked up another photo from the Derek pile, actually looked at it, compared it to the one Linda was holding. Her smile faded. "Wait," she said slowly. "These don't look like the same baby." Mom leaned in to see what she meant. She picked up a third photo, one she knew for certain was Derek because she'd taken it herself. Held it next to the ultrasound. They looked nothing alike, completely different face shape, different features. The photo that Linda was still holding, the one that supposedly matched the ultrasound perfectly, looked nothing like any of the confirmed Derek photos. The room got quiet in that weird way where everyone knows something's wrong, but nobody wants to say it. Derek's smile had disappeared. He took the photo from Linda's hand and stared at it. "Whose baby is this?" he asked. Mum looked confused. "I thought those were all Derek's photos. That's what I asked for." I felt my stomach drop. I'd grabbed those photos. I'd been the one digging through boxes. What if I'd grabbed the wrong pictures? We had tons of family photos mixed together. But I'd been careful. I'd checked the dates on the backs when I could. They were all from the right year. And here's where it gets absurd. Chelsea's younger sister, Megan, who'd been quiet this whole time, suddenly spoke up. Her voice was shaky. "That's Danny's baby picture." Everyone turned to look at her. Chelsea's face went completely white, like all the blood had just drained out of her in an instant. "What?" Derek said. He wasn't yelling, not yet, but his voice had this dangerous edge to it. Megan looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I recognize that photo. Danny's mum posted it on Facebook like a year ago for his birthday. That throwback thing people do." Danny, Chelsea's ex-boyfriend, the one she dated for 3 years before Derek, the one she'd sworn up and down she hadn't seen or talked to in over 2 years, not since she and Derek had gotten serious. Chelsea started crying, not subtle tears, full sobbing. She covered her face with her hands and just broke down right there in the middle of the living room with 30 people staring at her. Derek was still holding the photo. He looked at it, looked at the ultrasound, looked at Chelsea. "Why do you have Danny's baby photo?" His voice was eerily calm, too calm. Chelsea couldn't even form words, just kept crying into her hands. Her mum, Linda, tried to put an arm around her, but Chelsea shook her off. "Chelsea," Derek's voice was harder now, "why does our baby's ultrasound look exactly like your ex-boyfriend's baby picture?" That's when everything unraveled. The room erupted. People started talking over each other. Chelsea's dad stood up saying something about everyone needing to calm down. My mum looked horrified, like she'd just realized her cute game had detonated a bomb in the middle of her living room. Derek's best friend tried to pull him aside, probably to get him out of there before things got worse. But Derek wasn't moving. He just stood there staring at Chelsea, waiting for an answer. It took maybe 10 minutes of chaos before Chelsea finally pulled herself together enough to speak. She was still crying, makeup running down her face, but she managed to get words out. "I didn't mean for this to happen. It was one time, just once. I swear." The room went dead silent. You could hear someone's phone buzzing in a purse somewhere. That's how quiet it got. Derek's face did this thing I'd never seen before. It wasn't anger. It was worse. It was like watching someone's entire world collapse in real time. "When?" he asked. Chelsea wouldn't look at him. "December, when you were on that work trip to Denver." December. She'd gotten pregnant in January. The timeline was too close. Way too close. Derek turned and walked straight into the kitchen. Everyone heard the crash. He'd picked up the elaborate 3-tier cake Mum had ordered and thrown it against the wall. Blue frosting everywhere. The decorative topper that said Baby Anderson shattered on the tile floor. Chelsea ran to the bathroom and locked herself in. Her family scrambled to follow, knocking on the door, trying to get her to come out. Derek's friends surrounded him in the kitchen, keeping him from doing anything else destructive. My mom just stood there in shock, staring at the ruined cake dripping down her wall. I felt like I was going to throw up, because technically this was my fault. I'd brought my own baby photo to the game. That's what the matching picture was, not Derek's, mine. I'd apparently grabbed one of my newborn photos by mistake, when I was pulling pictures from the family albums. And my baby photo looked like Danny's baby photo, which looked like Chelsea's ultrasound, which meant Chelsea's baby looked like Danny's genetic line, which meant the baby definitely wasn't Derek's. If I hadn't made that mistake, none of this would have come out. At least not here. Not like this. Not in front of 30 people at what was supposed to be a celebration. The shower obviously ended. People left in awkward clusters, nobody making eye contact, everyone pretending they needed to be somewhere else. Chelsea eventually came out of the bathroom and her family took her home. Derek left with his friends. Mum and I stayed behind to clean up cake and decorations and the wreckage of what had been a party. Derek insisted on a DNA test before the baby was born, one of those prenatal paternity tests. Chelsea agreed. I don't think she had much choice at that point. The results came back last week. Not Derek's baby. 0% match. Might as well have tested a random stranger. They're getting divorced. Chelsea's 8 months pregnant with another man's baby, and her marriage is over. Derek's devastated. He'd been so excited to be a dad, had the nursery half painted, had already bought a crib and one of those fancy strollers. All of it's in storage now. Mum feels terrible about the whole thing. She keeps apologizing even though it wasn't really her fault. The game was innocent. She had no way of knowing what would happen, but she still feels responsible for creating the situation where it all came out. And I feel worse, because I'm the one who brought my baby photo. If I'd been more careful going through those albums, if I'd double-checked what I was grabbing, maybe this would have happened differently. Maybe Derek would have found out some other way, at some other time, in some less public disaster of a moment. Though, honestly, I don't know if there's a good way to find out your pregnant wife cheated on you, and the baby isn't yours. At least this way he found out before the birth, before he signed a birth certificate, before he was legally tied to a child that wasn't his. That's something, I guess. Chelsea tried to claim the test was wrong, said she wanted a second one. Derek's lawyer shut that down pretty fast. The science doesn't lie. The paternity test was clear, and that baby photo comparison, as accidentally as it happened, didn't lie either. Sometimes the truth comes out in the weirdest ways. Derek hasn't talked to Chelsea since the results came back. All communication goes through lawyers now. He's staying at my place temporarily while he figures out his next move. Some nights he's okay. Other nights I hear him in the guest room and I know he's not sleeping, just staring at the ceiling, processing everything. The baby's due in 3 weeks. Danny apparently knows now, Chelsea told him. From what I've heard through the family grapevine, he's planning to be involved, wants to step up, be a dad. Which is probably the right thing to do, but it doesn't make any of this less of a mess. I keep thinking about that moment in the living room when Chelsea's face went white, when everyone realized at the same time what was happening, when Derek's whole future just evaporated in the space of a few seconds. All because of a baby photo game at a shower, all because I grabbed the wrong picture from a box in an attic. This feels like a deleted scene from a sitcom, except sitcoms get resolved in 30 minutes and everyone learns a heartwarming lesson. This is just broken, messy, painful, no neat resolution coming, and if you think baby scandals are messy, wait until you hear what happens when funeral arrangements expose decades of deception. Dad died on a Tuesday, heart attack. He was 61 years old, reasonably healthy, no warning signs. He went to bed complaining about indigestion and never woke up. Mum found him the next morning. Just like that, he was gone. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and arrangements, and people bringing casseroles we'd never eat. My sister flew in from Seattle. We sat around Mom's kitchen table, numb and exhausted, trying to plan a funeral for a man who'd always said he wanted something simple. No fuss, just family and close friends. That's when Linda called. Mom answered the phone in the kitchen while my sister and I were going through Dad's address book, trying to figure out who needed to be notified. I heard Mom say hello, then go very quiet. Then she said, "Who is this?" in a tone I'd never heard her use before, sharp, almost hostile. There was a pause, then Mom said, "You need to stop calling this number," and hung up. My sister and I looked at each other. Mum's hands were shaking. The phone rang again. Mum stared at it like it was a snake. Let it go to voicemail. A woman's voice came through the speaker. She was crying, saying something about needing to know about the arrangements, about her kids needing closure, about how could we shut her out at a time like this. Mum picked up the phone and turned off the speaker. She said very coldly, "I don't know who you are, but this is a private family matter. Please stop calling." And she hung up again. Linda called back 6 more times that day. Mum stopped answering. The voicemails got more desperate, more detailed. And that's when we started to understand that something was very, very wrong. On Thursday, 2 days before the scheduled funeral, Linda showed up at the funeral home. We were there meeting with the director, going over final details. Music selections, photo boards, who would speak, normal funeral stuff. Then the receptionist came in looking uncomfortable and said there was a woman in the lobby insisting she needed to speak with us about the arrangements. Mum's face went hard. She said, "Tell her to leave." The receptionist hesitated. "She has 2 teenagers with her. They're very upset." My sister went out to deal with it. I followed her because I was curious and confused and starting to feel a creeping sense of dread. In the lobby stood a woman about Mum's age, blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, eyes red from crying. Next to her were 2 kids, a girl who looked about 16 and a boy who couldn't have been more than 14. They were both crying. My sister said, "Can we help you?" The woman, Linda, looked at us, looked at my sister, then at me. Her face crumpled. She said, "You look just like him, both of you." That's when everything unraveled. Linda wasn't a coworker, wasn't an old friend. She was Dad's other family, his second family. The family he'd been supporting and visiting and living with part-time for 17 years. 17 years. She'd met Dad at a work conference when I was in middle school. They'd started an affair. She got pregnant. Dad told her he'd leave Mum, that he just needed time. Classic story. Except he never left. He just started splitting his time. Told Mom he'd gotten a promotion that required more travel. Told Linda he was working on the divorce, but it was complicated. The teenagers standing in that funeral home lobby were my half-siblings, Sarah and Michael, Dad's other kids. They'd grown up knowing him as their father. He'd been at their soccer games, their school plays, their birthdays, just like he'd been at mine. My sister went back to get Mom. I stayed in the lobby with Linda and these 2 kids who were staring at me like I was a ghost, because I guess in a way I was. I was the other family, the one they probably knew existed but never had to confront. Mum came out. The funeral director came with her. When Mum saw Linda, she stopped walking, just froze in the middle of the lobby. Linda started talking fast, apologizing, explaining, crying, saying her kids deserved to say goodbye to their father, that Dad had loved them, that this wasn't fair. Mum said, "Get out." Linda said, "He was their father too." And Mum nearly collapsed. My sister caught her. The funeral director had to intervene, guide everyone into a private room, mediate what was essentially a crisis negotiation over who got to grieve. Here's where it gets absurd. Turned out Dad had planned for this. Not the dying at 61 part, but the eventually getting caught part. He'd updated his will 2 years ago, left instructions, split everything 50-50 between both families, the house, the savings, the life insurance, everything divided equally. He'd known that someday both families would find out about each other, and he'd made financial arrangements like that would somehow make it okay. The funeral director suggested 2 services, one for each family. Mum agreed because she couldn't stand the thought of sharing Dad's funeral with his mistress and secret children. So that's what we did. We had our service on Saturday morning. Linda and her kids had theirs Saturday afternoon. Same funeral home, same casket, same dead man who'd lied to everyone who loved him. I went to both. I don't know why. Morbid curiosity, maybe. My sister refused. Mum definitely didn't go, but I needed to see it, needed to understand the scope of Dad's double life. Linda's service was smaller, just her family, a few friends. Her kids spoke. Sarah talked about how Dad taught her to drive. Michael talked about fishing trips. They told stories I recognized because they were my stories too. Dad had recycled everything. The same advice, the same jokes, the same life lessons delivered to 2 different sets of kids in 2 different houses. Sarah looked like my sister. Same dark hair, same way of tilting her head when she talked. Michael looked like me at 14. Same build, same nervous habit of pushing his glasses up his nose. Looking at them was like looking into a funhouse mirror of my own family. Things went from bad to unhinged when we got the financial details. Dad's estate wasn't huge, but it was substantial. The house was paid off. He had a decent life insurance policy through work. Some investments. Mum had thought she'd be comfortable, that at least she'd be financially secure even though she was now alone. Half of it went to Linda, half the house value, half the insurance, half of everything. Linda and her kids got exactly what we got. Mom had to refinance the house to buy out Linda's share, the house she'd lived in for 30 years, the house she'd raised us in. She had to take out a mortgage at 60 years old just to keep living in her own home. My inheritance, the money I'd thought might help with my own kids' college funds someday, was cut in half to support children I didn't know existed until a week ago. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was going through Dad's things and finding evidence of his double life everywhere. 2 sets of birthday cards in his desk drawer, 2 Father's Day gifts, photos on his phone of Sarah's dance recitals, mixed in with photos of my sister's graduation, calendar appointments that said things like Michael's game that we'd all assumed were work meetings. He'd maintained this lie for 17 years, never slipped, never got caught. He'd compartmentalized his entire existence. Monday through Wednesday, he was Linda's partner and Sarah and Michael's dad. Thursday through Sunday, he was Mum's husband and our father. He'd managed schedules and stories and excuses with the precision of a spy. I found a second phone in his car, deactivated now but still full of messages, years of texts between him and Linda, planning meetups, coordinating lies, saying he loved her while sitting in the driveway of the house where Mom was making him dinner. Half my childhood memories are now contaminated. Every family vacation where Dad said he had to leave early for work, every weekend he spent away at conferences, every time he missed something important because he was traveling. It was all lies. He was with them, with his other family. The time he missed my high school graduation because of an emergency work trip. He was at Sarah's 8th grade promotion ceremony. The Christmas he had to fly out on the 26th for a last-minute client meeting. He was spending a second Christmas with Linda and the kids. Every absence, every excuse, every apology for missing something was just him choosing his other family over us, or choosing us over them, trading off, keeping everyone happy just enough that no one asked too many questions. Linda keeps trying to connect our families. She sends emails, friend requests on social media. She wants the half-siblings to know each other. Says her kids are innocent in this, which is true. They didn't ask for any of this. They're victims too. But I can't. I can't look at them without feeling like my entire life was a performance. Every moment with Dad was split, shared, diluted. He was never fully ours because half of him always belonged to them. My sister refuses to acknowledge they exist. Mum won't say their names. I'm somewhere in the middle, stuck between anger at Dad and guilt about punishing kids who didn't do anything wrong, except have the misfortune of being born to a man who thought he could have 2 families and never faced consequences. Michael sent me a message last week, said he was sorry, said he'd always known about us, about Mom, about the lie. Dad had told him and Sarah when they were old enough to understand, made them promise to keep the secret, so they'd been lying too. Not by choice maybe, but still lying. He said he understood if I never wanted to talk to them, said he just wanted me to know that Dad talked about me and my sister all the time, that he loved us. Like that makes it better. Like knowing Dad loved both families equally somehow balances out the betrayal. I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to process that Dad apparently loved all of us, just not enough to be honest with any of us. The lawyer says the estate should be settled in a few months. Then I guess we'll all go our separate ways. Linda will take her half and rebuild whatever life she can. Mum will stay in the house she had to mortgage. My sister and I will split what's left and try to move on. But some things you can't split down the middle. Trust, memory, the foundational belief that your parent was who you thought they were. Dad took those things to his grave, and he left both his families to sort through the rubble. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from strangers or secret families. Sometimes it comes from someone you thought you knew better than anyone. My sister Emma married Greg 5 years ago. It was one of those weddings that looks like it came straight out of a magazine. Outdoor ceremony, string lights everywhere, food that actually tasted good instead of the usual dry chicken you get at these things. Emma looked happy. Greg looked happy. Everyone kept saying they were the perfect couple, and honestly, they seemed like they were. I liked Greg well enough. He was polite, had a good job in finance, treated my sister well as far as I could tell. A little reserved, maybe, but that just seemed like his personality. He'd met Emma at some professional conference 3 years before the wedding. They'd hit it off, started dating long distance for a while. Then Greg relocated to be closer to her. Standard love story stuff. Last month I was at Mum's place helping her with a project she'd been putting off for years. She wanted to digitize all her old photos, the ones sitting in boxes in the basement slowly deteriorating. We'd been at it for a few hours, scanning pictures from my childhood, from family vacations, laughing at terrible haircuts and questionable fashion choices. Then I opened a box labeled College Years in Mum's handwriting. The photos inside were older, different quality, that specific film grain you got in the 90s. Most of them were of Mum looking impossibly young, hanging out with friends I didn't recognize, doing college kid things. Then I found a stack held together with a rubber band that had basically disintegrated. Photos of Mum with a guy, a lot of photos, beach photos, concert photos, casual shots of them together on what looked like a campus. The guy was tall, dark hair, had this crooked smile that seemed really familiar, but I couldn't place it. I looked closer. My stomach dropped. It was Greg, younger version, different haircut, but it was definitely my brother-in-law. I checked the date stamp on the back of one of the photos, August 1998. Mum would have been 22. She just graduated college that spring. Greg would have been, 19? 20? I sat there on the basement floor holding this photo, trying to make it make sense. Maybe it was someone who just looked like Greg. Maybe I was seeing things. But the more I looked, the more certain I became. That was Greg, in a photo with my mother from 27 years ago. I kept digging through the box, found letters, actual handwritten letters because this was before everyone had email and texted constantly. They were from Greg to Mom, well, from someone who signed his name as Greg and mentioned specific things that matched my brother-in-law's history. His hometown, his major in college, details that were too specific to be coincidence. From what I could piece together from the letters and photo dates, they dated for about 2 years, 1997 to 1999. The letters got less frequent toward the end. The last one I found was from Greg, apologizing for something, saying he understood if she needed space, hoping they could still be friends eventually. Mum had married Dad in 2000. I was born in 2001. Emma came along in 2004. And apparently, somewhere in that timeline, Mum's ex-boyfriend from college had completely disappeared from her life until he randomly met and started dating her daughter 25 years later. I took the box upstairs. Mum was in the kitchen making tea, humming to herself, completely unaware that I'd just found evidence that her son-in-law used to be her boyfriend. I put the box on the kitchen table, pulled out one of the photos. "Mom, who is this?" She glanced over, then did a double take, went pale, put down her tea mug carefully like she was afraid she might drop it. She said, "Where did you find that?" I said, "The basement, in the box you asked me to digitize. Mom, this is Greg. This is Emma's husband. Why do you have pictures of you and Greg from 1998? She sat down, didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "We dated in college. It was a long time ago. It didn't work out." I stared at her. "And when Greg showed up dating Emma 3 years ago, you didn't think that was something worth mentioning?" She got defensive, said it was ancient history, that it had been over for decades, that when Greg and Emma started dating, she'd been shocked at first, but then figured it was just coincidence that the world is smaller than we think, that these things happen. I said, "Does Greg know you're Emma's mum?" She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "We've never discussed it directly." "So he does know. He recognized you. He knew exactly who Emma was when he started dating her." Mom started crying, begged me not to tell Emma, said it would destroy her marriage over nothing, that Greg was a good husband, that what happened between them was so long ago it didn't matter anymore, that she'd made peace with it, but that wasn't even the worst part. I couldn't let it go. Over the next few days, I started paying more attention, looking at things I'd previously ignored. Mom and Greg at family dinners, the way they never quite made eye contact. How Mom always had an excuse to leave the room when Greg arrived. How Greg always seemed slightly uncomfortable at family gatherings. Then I did something I'm not proud of. I looked at Mom's computer when I was over there helping her with some tech issue she was having. I wasn't planning to snoop, but her email was open and I saw Greg's name in her inbox. Recent emails from 2 months ago. I opened them. I shouldn't have, but I did. They weren't physical. Nobody was cheating in the traditional sense, but they were emotional, familiar. Greg writing to Mom about how strange it was to be at family dinners, seeing her across the table, remembering who they used to be. Mom writing back about how she'd made her peace with it, how she loved seeing Emma happy, how they both needed to move on and let the past stay in the past. There were dozens of emails, spanning back over a year. They'd been having this ongoing private conversation the entire time Greg had been married to Emma. Talking about their old relationship, reminiscing, Greg telling Mom things he apparently never told Emma about his past. Mom confiding things about her marriage to Dad, nothing explicitly romantic, but intimate enough that it would absolutely destroy Emma if she knew. And here's where it gets absurd. I confronted Mom again. She broke down completely, admitted that when Greg had first started dating Emma, he'd reached out to her privately, said he hadn't known Emma was her daughter at first, that when he realized, he'd panicked. They'd met in person once, early on, to discuss what to do. Mom had told him to never mention their past, said Emma didn't need to know, that it would just complicate things. Greg had agreed. They'd both decided to pretend they were strangers meeting for the first time. But over the years, that secret had created this weird bond between them. This shared history that Emma knew nothing about. They'd started emailing, just occasionally at first, then more frequently. Mum said it was harmless, that they were just old friends catching up. I said, "You're not old friends. You're his mother-in-law, and he's your ex-boyfriend who's now married to your daughter. That's not harmless. That's a disaster waiting to happen." She begged me again not to tell Emma. Said it would ruin everything, that Emma was happy, that I'd be destroying her marriage for no reason. But I couldn't keep this secret. I just couldn't. Emma deserved to know that her husband had dated her mother, that they'd been hiding this from her for years, that they were still in contact, still talking about their past relationship, while Emma had no idea any of this existed. I told Emma last week, showed her the photos, the letters, printed out some of the emails. She didn't believe me at first, thought I was making some kind of sick joke. Then she looked at the evidence and her face just crumpled. She confronted Greg that night. He tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that yes, he'd dated Mom decades ago, but it was so insignificant he'd barely remembered it when he met Emma, that the emails were just him trying to maintain a good relationship with his mother-in-law. Emma wasn't buying it. She'd read the emails. She'd seen how he talked about their past, how he and Mom had deliberately hidden this from her, how they'd made a conscious decision to lie by omission for years. She's filing for divorce. Moved out of their apartment and is staying with a friend. Won't talk to Mom. Blocked Greg's number. She sent me one text that said, "I don't know if I should thank you or hate you for telling me." Greg's been trying to do damage control, calling family members, claiming I've blown everything out of proportion, that his relationship with Mom was ancient history and completely irrelevant to his marriage with Emma, that I've destroyed a happy marriage out of spite or jealousy or some other motivation he's invented. Mom's in therapy now. She called me crying, saying I've ruined everything, that Emma won't speak to her, that the family's falling apart, that I should have kept my mouth shut. And maybe she's right. Maybe I should have. Maybe I'm the villain in this story for exposing a truth that everyone else was happy to keep buried. Maybe Emma would have been better off never knowing that her husband used to date her mother, that they'd been having these private conversations, that her entire relationship was built on a foundation of secrets and lies. But I don't think so. I think Emma deserved to know. I think marrying someone who used to date your parent and never mentioning it is a betrayal. I think those emails, even if they were just emotional and not physical, crossed a line. The family's not speaking to me except for Emma, and even that's complicated. She's devastated. Her marriage is over. Her relationship with Mom might never recover, and she's caught between being grateful I told her and wishing she could go back to not knowing. Greg's moved out of their apartment. Last I heard, he's staying with a friend and trying to convince Emma that this is all salvageable, that they can work through it, that his past with Mom doesn't change how he feels about her, But how do you work through discovering your husband used to date your mother and they both hid it from you for years? How do you rebuild trust after that? I don't have answers. I just know I couldn't keep the secret. Even if that makes me the villain. Even if everyone's mad at me. Even if I destroyed my sister's marriage and fractured my relationship with my mother. The truth matters. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. You'd think after all that family chaos, we'd move somewhere safer. But workplace betrayal hits different when your career's on the line. Our boss, Richard, was the kind of manager everyone wanted to work for. Generous, approachable. The type who actually remembered your kids' names and asked about your weekend plans like he genuinely cared. He'd been with the company for 12 years, worked his way up from sales associate to regional director, and everyone respected him for it. But the thing people loved most about Richard was his generosity with the company card. Team dinners at nice restaurants, drinks after big wins. He always picked up the tab, always made sure everyone felt appreciated. Last month, Richard called me into his office looking frazzled. He had this expense report he needed to submit but couldn't find the original receipt. He'd already been reimbursed by accounting through a temporary approval, but they needed the documentation for the final records. He asked if I could do him a favor. He'd forward me the digital copy, and I'd just need to scan it, attach it to the expense form, and submit it through the system. Simple administrative task. Takes maybe 5 minutes. I said sure. No problem. He was my boss. This was the kind of thing you do. He emailed me the receipt that afternoon. I opened it while finishing up some other paperwork. It was from Marcello's, this upscale Italian place downtown, where we'd had a team dinner about 3 weeks prior. The receipt showed a date from that same evening. I almost just submitted it without looking closer, but something made me pause. The total seemed low. Our team dinners usually ran about $800 to $1,000, with appetizers, entrees, drinks for 8 people, tip included. This receipt was for $240. I looked at the itemization. 2 glasses of champagne, oysters, 2 filet mignons, tiramisu, a bottle of wine. It was a dinner for 2, a romantic dinner for 2. That's weird, I thought. Maybe Richard had taken a client out and just grabbed the wrong receipt. I pulled up our team dinner expense report from that night to double-check the date. Same restaurant, same evening. But our reservation had been at 7:30. This receipt was time-stamped at 5:45. He'd had dinner with someone else, then rushed across town to meet us for the team dinner an hour later. I sat there staring at my screen, feeling that sinking sensation you get when you realize you've stumbled onto something you really wish you hadn't. Richard was married. We'd all met his wife Janet at the Christmas party. She was nice, a lawyer who worked in the building next door. They'd been married for 15 years. I didn't want to get involved. I thought about just deleting the email and telling Richard I never received it. Let him deal with his own mess. But I'd already opened it. I'd already seen it. And I worked in finance. If I submitted a fraudulent expense report, even unknowingly, that was on me too. So I did what I thought was the safe thing. I submitted the receipt exactly as Richard had asked. I attached it to the expense form, coded it the way he'd indicated, and sent it through the system. If accounting wanted to ask questions, they could ask Richard. Accounting flagged it within 2 days. The expense code Richard had used was for team building activities, but the receipt clearly showed a dinner for 2. The accounting manager reached out to me first since I'd submitted it. I explained that Richard had asked me to file it, that I'd just done what my boss requested. She thanked me and said she'd follow up with Richard directly. That should have been the end of it. A simple mistake. Maybe Richard would explain he'd grabbed the wrong receipt. Maybe he'd submit the correct one, and we'd all move on. But that wasn't even the worst part. The accounting manager didn't just follow up with Richard. She flagged it to her supervisor because the coding violation was a potential audit issue. Her supervisor kicked it to HR because personal expenses on company cards are a terminable offense. And HR, being HR, started digging. They pulled Richard's expense reports for the past year, started looking at patterns, dates, locations, vendor names, and they found dozens of similar receipts: romantic dinners for 2, hotel rooms, weekend trips coded as client meetings, flower deliveries, even jewelry from Tiffany's coded as corporate gifts, 8 months of expenses, tens of thousands of dollars, all charged to corporate cards, all coded as business development or client entertainment. HR launched a formal investigation. They interviewed people, checked calendars, cross-referenced Richard's reported client meetings with actual client interactions. The story started coming together pretty quickly. Richard had been having an affair with his assistant, Melissa. She'd started at the company about 9 months ago, fresh out of college, ambitious. Everyone thought Richard was just mentoring her. Turns out he was mentoring her in hotel rooms on the company dime. The romantic dinners, the weekend getaways coded as conferences, the gifts, it was all for Melissa. He'd been using company resources to fund an affair for 8 months straight. The company car had GPS tracking for insurance purposes. HR pulled the logs, weekend trips to coastal bed and breakfasts, afternoon visits to boutique hotels downtown, all while his wife thought he was working late or traveling for business. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. HR had to conduct interviews as part of the investigation. Standard procedure. They interviewed the team, people who'd been on those business trips, anyone who might have witnessed inappropriate behavior or knew about the relationship. They also had to interview Janet, Richard's wife, because she was listed as his emergency contact, and some of the expenses overlapped with dates when Richard had told her he was at company events. Janet worked at Morrison & Associates, the law firm that leased the third floor of our building. She came in for the HR interview on a Thursday afternoon. I saw her in the lobby, looking confused and worried, probably thinking something had happened to Richard. She went into the HR office at 2. She came out at 4. Her face was completely blank, like every emotion had been wiped away and replaced with nothing. The HR director walked her out personally, very gentle, very professional. Janet didn't cry, didn't yell, just walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and left. The divorce papers arrived before Richard's termination letter. Janet must have gone straight back to her office and filed. Richard got served at work the next Monday morning. Process server walked right into his office, handed him the envelope, and left. By that afternoon, the whole building knew. HR fired Richard on Tuesday, terminated for cause, misuse of company resources, fraudulent expense reporting, violation of workplace relationship policies. They walked him out with a banker's box of his personal belongings and an escort to his car. I watched from my desk as he crossed the parking lot. He looked smaller somehow, deflated. Melissa got fired the same day. Different reasons officially. HR couldn't prove she'd known the expenses were fraudulent, but they had enough on workplace conduct violations to terminate her too. She cried in the hallway while packing her things, kept saying it wasn't fair, that they loved each other, that no one understood. The company wanted to pursue legal action for the fraudulent expenses, but decided the publicity wasn't worth it. They demanded repayment. Last I heard, Richard's trying to negotiate a settlement. Good luck with that while also paying for a divorce lawyer. Things went from bad to unhinged when the promotion announcements came out. The company needed to fill Richard's position quickly. They'd already started interviewing external candidates, but then they offered it to me, acting regional director with a path to permanent if I performed well in the first quarter. I said yes. Obviously, I said yes. It was a massive promotion, better title, significant pay increase, my own office. Everything I'd been working toward. That's when the rumors started. People saying I'd sabotaged Richard, that I'd deliberately submitted the wrong receipt to get him in trouble, that I'd manufactured the whole scandal to steal his job. Never mind that Richard had been committing expense fraud for 8 months before I ever touched that receipt. Never mind that I'd literally just done what my boss asked me to do. Never mind that HR had found dozens of violations completely independent of the one receipt I'd submitted. People needed someone to blame, and apparently that someone was me. My former teammates stopped talking to me. The group chat went silent whenever I posted. Someone started a rumor that I'd been sleeping with the CFO to get the promotion. Another rumor said I'd planted evidence. It was middle school level drama, except we were all adults with mortgages and retirement accounts. The irony is that if Richard had just submitted his own expense report like a normal person, none of this would have happened, or it would have happened differently. Maybe accounting would have caught it eventually anyway. Maybe Melissa would have posted something on social media. Maybe Janet would have found a receipt in his car, but it wouldn't have been because of me. I didn't sabotage anyone. I submitted a receipt. That's it. I followed instructions from my supervisor and filed paperwork. The fact that the paperwork exposed 8 months of fraud and an affair isn't my fault. That's on Richard for being stupid enough to expense his affair and sloppy enough to send me the wrong receipt. But here I am, promoted into a position I earned, surrounded by people who think I'm some kind of corporate backstabber. My first week in the new role was incredibly awkward, people avoiding eye contact in meetings, conversations stopping when I walked into the break room. The passive-aggressive energy was suffocating. I thought about quitting, starting over somewhere else where I didn't have this reputation, but that felt like admitting I'd done something wrong when I hadn't. So I stayed, did my job, proved I deserved the position. It's been 2 months now. Some people have warmed up. Others still give me the cold shoulder. I've hired 2 new people to replace Richard and Melissa. Neither of them knows the history, which is refreshing. They just see me as their boss, not as the person who supposedly destroyed their predecessor. Janet sent me an email last week, just said thank you, said if I hadn't submitted that receipt when I did, she might have wasted years more on a man who didn't respect her. Said she was grateful for the truth, even though it hurt. She's doing better now, apparently. The divorce is almost final. I didn't respond. What do you even say to that? You're welcome for accidentally exposing your husband's affair. Glad I could help destroy your marriage while trying to file routine paperwork. I just archived the email and moved on. Richard's LinkedIn says he's doing consulting now. Relationship status is complicated according to his Facebook. Melissa moved to another state. The company's implemented new expense reporting protocols with additional oversight and automated flagging systems. And I'm still here, in Richard's old office, with Richard's old title. Living with a reputation I didn't ask for because I submitted a receipt my boss told me to submit. The moral of the story? I genuinely have no idea. Don't have affairs? Don't expense them if you do? Don't ask your employees to handle your paperwork when you're committing fraud? All of the above? I just submitted a receipt, but sometimes the person investigating your workplace isn't HR. Sometimes they've been sitting right next to you all along. Sarah started as a summer intern in June, fresh out of grad school, business degree from a decent university, one of those people who shows up on their first day with a leather portfolio and color-coded notebooks. She seemed eager to learn, asked intelligent questions, stayed late without being asked, the kind of intern you actually want on your team instead of someone you have to babysit through basic Excel functions. I was assigned as her mentor, standard company practice. Senior employees get paired with interns to show them the ropes, explain company culture, help them build skills. I'd done it before. Usually it meant a few coffee chats and reviewing their work occasionally. Not a huge time commitment, but Sarah was different. She was genuinely interested in everything: how our department functioned, what projects we'd worked on historically, the evolution of our business model. She'd come to my desk with questions about processes, about decision-making frameworks, about why we structured deals certain ways. I appreciated the enthusiasm. It's rare to find an intern who actually cares about understanding the business beyond just padding their resume. About 2 weeks in, she asked if she could review some of our historical project files. Said she learned better by seeing real examples rather than theoretical case studies. Made total sense to me. I got her access to our shared drive, showed her where we kept documentation from major projects going back about 5 years, told her to dig in, ask questions if anything was unclear. She was particularly interested in our 2019 merger. We'd acquired a smaller competitor, consolidated operations, expanded our market share. It had been a big deal at the time. Front page of the business section. Our CEO had done interviews, the stock had jumped. Company success story. Sarah spent weeks on that merger, reading through documents, creating timelines. She'd come to me with specific questions about valuations, about how we'd assessed the target company's worth, about the due diligence process. I walked her through it, explained how our finance team had evaluated assets, how the negotiations had progressed, what factors had influenced the final price. I thought she was just being thorough, building a comprehensive understanding of a complex transaction. Exactly what a good intern should do. She asked about specific executives involved in the deal, who made which decisions, how information flowed, what the timeline looked like for key approvals. I answered everything. Why wouldn't I? This was all company history, nothing classified, nothing I thought was sensitive. Looking back, I should have wondered why a summer intern needed this level of detail, but she framed it as wanting to understand corporate development strategy. Said she might want to go into mergers and acquisitions after graduation. It seemed reasonable. 3 months into her internship, on a Tuesday morning in late August, federal agents walked into our office, badges out, serious faces. They went straight to the executive floor. Within an hour, they were boxing up documents from the CEO's office, the CFO's office, and our general counsel's suite. People were being escorted out for questioning. Nobody knew what was happening. We got an emergency all-hands meeting at noon. Our head of HR, looking like she might throw up, told us the company was cooperating with an SEC investigation. Something about the 2019 merger, potential securities fraud. Everyone should continue working normally, but speak to legal before discussing anything with outside parties. The office went into chaos mode, people whispering in conference rooms, lawyers everywhere, executives unavailable. Work ground to a halt as everyone tried to figure out what was going on and whether they personally were in trouble. That's when everything unraveled. Sarah wasn't in the office that day, or the next day. Her desk was cleared out. Her company laptop was gone. Someone from IT said her access had been revoked. She'd just disappeared. HR called me in 2 days later, sat me down with one of the external lawyers the company had brought in, asked me about my interactions with Sarah, what I'd shown her, what access I'd given her, what we'd discussed. That's when they told me. Sarah wasn't actually an intern. She was an investigator with the Securities and Exchange Commission, undercover, placed in our company specifically to investigate the 2019 merger. And I'd given her everything: full access to project files, detailed explanations of our processes, names of everyone involved, timeline of decisions. I'd basically handed her a roadmap to our entire operation. The 2019 merger I'd walked her through so carefully, built on fraudulent valuations and insider trading. The CFO and several board members had manipulated asset assessments to inflate the target company's value. They'd traded on non-public information before the deal was announced. Classic securities fraud, the kind that destroys companies and sends executives to prison. Sarah had used my access, my explanations, my trust to build the case. Every question I'd answered had given her another piece of the puzzle. Every document I'd showed her had provided more evidence. I'd been her primary source without even knowing I was being investigated. The CEO and CFO were arrested within a week. Perp walked out of the building in handcuffs. The company's stock tanked 40% in a single day. Clients started pulling contracts. Partners distanced themselves. The whole thing spiraled fast, but that wasn't even the worst part. The investigation revealed that the fraud had been systematic. Multiple deals over several years, inflated valuations, insider trading, falsified reports. The company's entire financial foundation was questionable. Auditors came in. More executives were implicated. The board resigned. Mass layoffs followed. The company needed to restructure, cut costs, survive the scandal. I lost my job in the second round of cuts, not for wrongdoing. I wasn't charged with anything. I genuinely hadn't known about the fraud, but I was tainted by association. I'd worked closely on that merger. I'd mentored the investigator who'd brought everything down. My severance was minimal because the company was bleeding money on legal fees. My professional network disappeared overnight. Nobody wants to be associated with a company under federal investigation. References became complicated. How do you explain that your previous employer imploded due to securities fraud without sounding like you might have been involved? I was unemployed for 7 months before finding anything. Even then, it was a lateral move at half my previous salary. Background checks meant endless explanations about the investigation, about my role, about what I'd known and when. Every interview became an interrogation about whether I'd participated in or known about the fraud. Sarah sent me a LinkedIn message about 6 months after everything fell apart. A long, carefully worded apology. She said she was sorry for the deception, that she'd hated lying to me, that I'd been helpful and kind and hadn't deserved to be used that way. But she wanted me to know that the investigation had exposed corruption that could have destroyed thousands of retirement accounts, that pensioners and everyday investors were protected because the fraud was stopped. She meant well. I believe that. The executives who got arrested deserved it. The fraud was real. People could have been seriously hurt if it had continued, but I'm still dealing with the fallout. My career took a hit. I'm not sure I'll ever fully recover from. My reputation is tainted by association, even though I wasn't charged, wasn't even seriously investigated beyond initial questioning. I was just the helpful mentor who unknowingly aided a federal investigation. I can't stop wondering, if I'd been less helpful, less trusting, less willing to share information, would I still have a career? If I'd questioned why an intern needed such detailed access, would I have kept my job? If I'd been more suspicious, more guarded, would my professional life not be in ruins? The rational part of me knows I did nothing wrong. I mentored an intern the way I was supposed to. I shared information that I had every right to share. I couldn't have known she was undercover. I couldn't have known the merger was built on fraud. But the cynical part of me that's been unemployed and struggling and explaining myself in interviews for months thinks maybe I should have known. Maybe I should have been less trusting. Maybe in corporate America, being helpful and open is just setting yourself up to be used. I don't mentor interns anymore. My current company asked if I'd be willing when they brought on summer hires. I said no, didn't explain why. Just said it wasn't a good fit for my schedule. Because here's what I learned. Trust is a liability. Helping people gives them weapons they can use against you, even if they don't mean to. And sometimes doing the right thing, being the good mentor, being helpful and thorough, will destroy your career anyway. Sarah exposed real corruption. She probably saved a lot of people from financial harm. She did her job well. I don't blame her for that. But I'm still paying the price for being the person who helped her do it. The executives who committed fraud are facing prison time. The company survived, but barely, under new leadership and massive restructuring. Investors who got out early did okay. Investors who held on lost most of their money anyway. And me? I'm rebuilding from scratch at 43 years old. Learning to be suspicious instead of helpful, guarding information instead of sharing it, keeping people at arm's length instead of mentoring them. Maybe that's just how you survive in this world. Maybe trust is for people who can afford the consequences. I can't. Not anymore. At least she was apologetic. Some coworkers actively try to destroy you and smile to your face while doing it. Brad wanted my promotion. Senior analyst position with a corner office, 20% raise, better benefits, the whole package. We'd both been with the company about the same amount of time, had similar performance reviews, similar qualifications. It was going to be a close call, and we both knew it. I thought we were competing fairly, putting in extra hours, taking on high visibility projects, building relationships with upper management. You know, the normal corporate ladder climbing stuff. Turns out Brad had a different strategy. Things started going wrong about 6 weeks before the promotion decision. Small stuff at first. A typo in a report I'd proofread 3 times. A formatting error in a presentation I knew I'd fixed. Easy to dismiss as just being tired or distracted. I corrected them and moved on. Then the problems escalated. A client report went out with incorrect data. Numbers that didn't match our records. I got called into my manager's office. She showed me the email, my name, my signature block. Data I absolutely had not compiled. I tried to explain that something was wrong, that I hadn't sent that version, but I couldn't prove it. The email came from my account. The report had my name on it. A week later, a client complained that I'd sent a confrontational email about their payment schedule, except I'd never sent any email about payments. That wasn't even my department. But there it was, my email address, my typical sign-off. Language that kind of sounded like me, but not quite. My manager called me in again, said she was concerned about my recent performance issues, that this wasn't like me. Was something going on at home? Was I overwhelmed? Did I need to take some personal time? I knew something was off. I'm meticulous about my work. I triple-check everything. I don't send emails without reading them at least twice. Someone was sabotaging me. The question was who and how. Then I remembered. Brad and I had worked on a joint project about 4 months back. Some cross-departmental analysis that required us to access each other's files. We'd shared login credentials temporarily to make collaboration easier. It was against company policy, but everyone did it when deadlines were tight. I'd changed my password after the project ended, or at least I thought I had. I checked my login history through IT. Brad had accessed my account 17 times in the past month. During lunch breaks, after I'd left for the day, times when I definitely wasn't at my desk, but my computer might still be unlocked. He'd been editing my files, sending emails from my account, sabotaging my work to make himself look better by comparison. Classic corporate backstabbing, except he'd taken it to a whole new level. I changed my password immediately, set up 2-factor authentication, started locking my computer every single time I stepped away from my desk. But the damage was already done. My manager thought I was having performance issues, my reputation was compromised, and I had no proof that Brad was behind it. That's when I got an idea. Brad was arrogant, cocky, the kind of guy who couldn't resist bragging when he thought he was winning. If I could get him to admit what he'd done, I'd have everything I needed. I set up a Zoom call, told Brad I needed his advice, said I was worried about losing the promotion, that my recent mistakes were killing my chances, that I didn't know how to recover my reputation. I played it desperate, vulnerable, like I was on the edge of giving up. Brad took the bait immediately, agreed to the call, probably thought he'd twist the knife a little more, offer some fake sympathy while enjoying my downfall. I recorded everything, made sure the recording was running before he even joined. Set it to save locally and to the cloud. I wasn't taking any chances. The call started normally, Brad doing his concerned colleague routine, asking what was going on, offering generic advice about double-checking my work, managing my stress, maybe talking to HR about workload. Then I pushed a little. Said I didn't understand how these mistakes were happening, that I was sure I'd checked that client report, that I didn't remember sending that email about payments. And here's where it gets absurd. Brad couldn't help himself. He started getting smug, said something like, well, sometimes we think we did something, but we actually didn't. Memory can be unreliable. I said, it's weird though, it's like someone else is using my account. He laughed, actually laughed, said, that's a pretty paranoid thought. You think someone's hacking you? I said, I don't know, is that possible? And he just went for it, started explaining like he was teaching me something useful, how easy it is to access someone's account if you have their credentials, how you could edit documents, send emails, make it look like the other person did it, all theoretical of course, just explaining how these things work. I kept playing dumb, kept asking questions. How would someone even do that? Wouldn't there be logs? Couldn't IT catch them? Brad explained it all. How to clear browser history, how to access files during times that seem normal, how to mimic someone's writing style. He was so pleased with himself, so confident that I was too stupid to understand what he was actually telling me. Then came the breaking point. I said, Brad, is that what happened to me? Did someone do that to my account? And he said, I mean, hypothetically, if someone wanted to make you look bad, that's how they do it. I pushed harder. Did you do this to me, Brad? He hesitated. I could see him on the screen, weighing whether to keep up the act or just admit it. His ego won. He said, look, it's just business. We're both going for the same position. I needed an edge. You would have done the same thing if you'd thought of it first. I said, so you edited my files? He said, during your lunch breaks? Yeah. You always leave your computer unlocked. It was easy. I said, and the client emails? He said, took me maybe 10 minutes. You have a pretty predictable writing style. Easy to copy. I said, even the payment one? That wasn't even my department. He laughed again. That one was risky, yeah. But it worked. Made you look incompetent and overreaching at the same time. I let him talk for 43 minutes. He explained everything. How he'd kept my old password from the joint project. How he'd watched my patterns to know when I'd be away from my desk. How he'd carefully edited just enough to cause problems without being obvious. How he'd deleted backup copies from the shared drive so I couldn't prove the documents had been altered. He was proud of himself, genuinely proud, thought he'd executed the perfect sabotage. I thanked him for his honesty, ended the call, and immediately forwarded the recording to HR, my manager, and the department head. Brad was fired within 3 hours, walked out by security. His access revoked before he even made it to his desk to pack his things. The company took it seriously. Unauthorized access to another employee's account, sabotage, falsifying business communications, all terminable offenses, possibly even criminal, though they decided not to press charges if he left quietly. I got the promotion, the corner office, the raise, everything I'd been working toward. My manager apologized for doubting me. HR implemented new security protocols. Everyone acted like I was some kind of hero for exposing Brad. But here's the thing, I don't feel like a hero. I feel paranoid, because if Brad could do this, who else could? How many other people in this office would sabotage a colleague for a promotion? How many would edit my files, send fake emails, destroy my reputation if they thought they could get away with it? I changed all my passwords, every single account. Work email, project management systems, shared drives, everything. Set up two-factor authentication on everything that allowed it. I lock my computer every single time I stand up, even if I'm just going to the printer, even if I'm stepping away for 30 seconds. I save everything to personal encrypted drives now. Every report, every email, every document. I keep backup copies of backup copies. I document conversations. I follow up verbal agreements with written confirmation. I trust nothing and no one. People think I'm paranoid. Maybe I am. But I'm also employed. I'm also in the senior analyst position with the corner office. I'm also not the one who got fired for sabotaging a colleague. Brad tried to frame me and failed because I was smarter. I recorded his confession and used it against him. Clean, legal, effective. The kind of thing that should make me feel good about workplace justice. Instead, it just made me realize how easy it is to destroy someone's career if you're willing to be underhanded. How vulnerable we all are. How much we rely on trust in a system where trust is a liability. I got what I wanted. The promotion. The validation. The satisfaction of watching Brad get escorted out by security while I stayed and thrived. But I also lost something. The ability to work without constantly looking over my shoulder. The capacity to trust that my colleagues are competing fairly. The naive belief that hard work and competence are enough. Now I know better. Now I know that every coworker is a potential saboteur. That access is a weapon. That trust is something you can't afford in corporate America. Paranoid? Maybe. But also promoted. Also secure. Also not the one who got recorded confessing to sabotage on a Zoom call that I stupidly thought was private. Brad wanted my promotion. He tried to destroy me to get it. Instead, he destroyed himself. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge is just giving someone enough rope to hang themselves. I just had to provide the rope and press record. Office politics are brutal, but they've got nothing on what happens when the top of the company accidentally exposes everyone's dirty secrets. Our CEO, Thomas, sent a company-wide apology email on a Tuesday morning in September. The subject line was, regarding recent concerns about compensation equity, and it opened with the kind of corporate language you'd expect from someone who'd been coached by lawyers and PR consultants. Professional, vague, designed to say something while saying nothing at all. The email acknowledged that there had been rumors circulating about pay disparities. It reassured us that the company took these concerns seriously. It promised a thorough review of compensation structures. It emphasized the company's commitment to fairness and transparency. All the standard talking points meant to calm people down without actually admitting anything or promising anything concrete. I was reading it at my desk, half paying attention, thinking it was just another empty corporate gesture. The kind of thing executives send to cover themselves when employees start asking uncomfortable questions. I probably would have deleted it and moved on with my day. Except Thomas had attached a file. The email mentioned that attached were the HR-approved guidelines for how managers should discuss compensation with their teams. Standard procedure. Just documentation to make everything official. I opened the attachment out of mild curiosity. Maybe there'd be something actually useful in there. Some concrete information about how raises would be determined or when reviews would happen. The file that opened was not HR-approved guidelines. It was a spreadsheet, a massive, detailed, comprehensive spreadsheet containing every employee's name, title, department, salary, and bonus structure for the entire company, all 847 people. I stared at my screen trying to process what I was seeing. This had to be a mistake. There was no way Thomas had meant to send this, but there it was. Complete payroll data, searchable, sortable. Completely exposed to everyone in the company. The email had gone out at 9 a.m. By 9:15, my phone started buzzing. Slack messages, texts, people asking if I'd seen the attachment, if it was real, if this was actually happening. By 9:30, chaos had erupted. The spreadsheet was making its way through the company like wildfire. People were searching for their own names, comparing salaries with colleagues, discovering things that had been carefully hidden behind corporate policies about not discussing compensation. And what people were discovering was ugly. Women in the same roles as men, with the same experience and qualifications, were making 25 to 30% less. Across the board, every department, some disparities were even worse. Sarah in marketing, who'd been with the company for 8 years and was widely considered one of our best performers, was making $42,000 less than Michael, who'd been hired 6 months ago to do essentially the same job. People of color flagged systemic disparities that followed clear patterns: lower starting salaries, smaller annual raises, fewer bonuses. The data was right there in black and white, impossible to deny or explain away. New hires were discovering they'd been brought in at salaries higher than people who'd been with the company for 10, 15 years. People who'd been told there was no budget for raises were seeing new employees making 20% more for entry-level positions. The IT department tried to recall the email, sent out urgent messages asking people to delete it without reading the attachment, threatened disciplinary action for anyone who shared the information. But it was too late. Everyone had already seen it. Screenshots were everywhere. People had downloaded the file. You can't unring that bell. But that wasn't even the worst part. By mid-morning, people started organizing, comparing notes, building cases. The women in product development created a shared document cataloging every instance of pay disparity they could find in the data. 17 women doing identical work to male colleagues, all making significantly less. Someone in finance pointed out that the bonus structure heavily favored certain departments. Sales and executive leadership got bonuses that were sometimes triple their base salary. Everyone else got maybe 5 to 10% if they were lucky. The spreadsheet showed VPs getting bonuses larger than most employees' annual salaries. By noon, 17 people had resigned, just walked out, didn't give 2 weeks' notice, didn't have exit interviews, just sent emails to HR saying they were done, effective immediately, and left the building. Most of them were women and people of color who'd just discovered exactly how undervalued they were. The company tried to do damage control, called emergency meetings. HR sent out talking points about how compensation is complex and can't be reduced to simple comparisons, how there are factors that aren't reflected in a basic spreadsheet, how everyone's individual circumstances are different. Nobody was buying it. The data was too clear. The patterns were too obvious. You couldn't explain away a 30% pay gap between two people with identical titles, identical responsibilities, and similar tenure. Then came the breaking point. By the end of the week, 3 employees had filed lawsuits, class action potential, discrimination based on gender and race, using Thomas's accidentally leaked spreadsheet as evidence. The local news picked up the story. Tech blogs wrote articles about it. We became a case study in corporate pay inequality practically overnight. Thomas issued a second apology, this one claiming the leaked spreadsheet was an honest mistake. He'd meant to attach a different document and grabbed the wrong file from his downloads folder. Could happen to anyone. Simple human error in a stressful situation. The board launched an investigation, not just into the pay disparities, but into how Thomas had even had access to that file in a format he could accidentally attach to an email. Payroll data like that should have been locked down, accessible only through secure systems with logging and oversight. That's when they discovered it wasn't his first mistake. The investigation revealed that Thomas had been forwarding sensitive company data to his personal email account for months. Financial reports, strategic plans, employee information, HR records, hundreds of documents that should never have left company servers. When asked why, he claimed he liked to review important documents at home in the evenings, wanted to be thorough, didn't realize it was against policy, even though we'd all sat through mandatory security training about this exact thing at least twice a year. The board forced him out, gave him a choice between resigning quietly with a severance package or being terminated for cause with nothing. He resigned, put out a statement about wanting to spend more time with family and pursue other opportunities. The usual corporate exit script. The company settled the lawsuits for millions, never went to trial. They couldn't afford the publicity of discovery, of having all their compensation practices examined in detail in court. Easier to pay out and move on. Then came the equity adjustments. HR reviewed every employee's compensation against market rates and internal comparisons. People who'd been underpaid got raises, some substantial. I got a 20% increase. Sarah in marketing got a 35% bump. They tried to frame it as the company proactively addressing concerns. not as admitting they'd been systematically underpaying people for years. But the damage was done. Half my team quit anyway, even with the raises, because it wasn't just about the money, it was about the betrayal. The discovery that the company had known about these disparities, had perpetuated them, had lied about their commitment to fairness while actively paying people unfairly. The raises felt like hush money, like the company trying to buy back trust they'd destroyed. And you can't buy trust. Once people know you've been systematically undervaluing them for years, a retroactive raise doesn't fix that. We're still rebuilding. 6 months later, new CEO who keeps talking about transparency and culture change, new HR leadership, new compensation frameworks with regular audits, all the things we should have had all along. But the institutional knowledge we lost is irreplaceable. Senior people with decades of experience walked out and took their expertise with them. Projects got delayed, client relationships suffered. The cost of those 17 immediate resignations and the dozens more who left in the following months was way higher than just paying people fairly in the first place would have been. And it all happened because of one carelessly attached file. Thomas grabbed the wrong document from his downloads folder and exposed the entire ugly truth of how the company had been operating. One click, one attachment. Complete organizational meltdown. The irony is that if he'd just been honest from the beginning, if the company had proactively addressed pay equity instead of waiting for it to explode, none of this would have happened. They could have done the equity adjustments quietly, fixed the problems before they became lawsuits and media scandals, but they waited, and Thomas's mistake forced everything into the open in the worst possible way. I still have a screenshot of that spreadsheet. Lots of people do. It's become this artifact of corporate dysfunction, proof that sometimes the biggest revelations come not from whistleblowers or investigations, but from simple incompetence. Thomas is at another company now, smaller place. I saw his LinkedIn update. He's calling himself a transformation leader with expertise in organizational change. The audacity is almost impressive. The guy who accidentally exposed massive pay inequities and got forced out in disgrace is now selling himself as a change management expert. And maybe in a twisted way he is. He definitely changed our organization, just not in the way he intended. The company survived. We've hired new people, implemented new systems. The stock price recovered after the initial drop. Clients stayed. We're functioning, but we're not the same. There's a cynicism now that wasn't there before, a wariness. Everyone knows the company will do what's best for the company, not what's best for employees, and any talk about values or culture is just talk until proven otherwise. All because of one email attachment, one careless click that unraveled everything. Sometimes companies lie to protect themselves, but sometimes they just flat out call you a liar until you prove them devastatingly wrong. I reported my supervisor for harassment in March. His name was Mark, and he'd been making my work life hell for about 6 months. Inappropriate comments about my appearance, unwanted touching, the hand on the shoulder that lingered too long, the arm around my waist during team photos, jokes that crossed lines, that thing where he'd stand too close when reviewing my work, invading my space in a way that made my skin crawl. I tried to handle it quietly at first, pulled away when he touched me, didn't laugh at the inappropriate jokes, made excuses to avoid one-on-one meetings, but it kept escalating. So I did what you're supposed to do. I reported it to HR. HR scheduled a meeting for the following week. I came prepared. I had dates, specific incidents written out in detail, names of co-workers who'd witnessed things, text messages where Mark had sent me comments about my outfit or made suggestions about getting drinks after work. I documented everything because I knew how these things went. You needed evidence. You needed to be bulletproof. The HR director, Patricia, sat across from me in the conference room looking polished and professional. She had a legal pad in front of her and this expression of concerned attentiveness that probably worked on most people. She listened while I went through everything, took notes, asked clarifying questions, seemed like she was taking it seriously. Then she closed her legal pad and said they'd investigated thoroughly, that they'd spoken to relevant parties, that they'd reviewed my claims carefully, and that they found no evidence to support what I was saying. I sat there confused. I had evidence. I'd just shown her evidence. There were witnesses. How could there be no evidence? Patricia continued. Said that frankly, They believed I was fabricating these accusations to avoid an upcoming performance review, that my recent work had been subpar and I was trying to deflect attention from my own shortcomings. I was stunned. My performance review was fine. I'd been hitting all my targets. This had nothing to do with my work quality and everything to do with Mark being a creep. I tried to argue, mentioned my coworker Jessica, who'd seen Mark corner me in the break room. Patricia said Jessica had no recollection of any such incident. I mentioned the text messages. Patricia said they could be interpreted as friendly workplace banter. Every piece of evidence I'd brought, she had a dismissal ready. Then came the threat. Patricia leaned forward, her voice taking on this harder edge, and said that if I continued making false accusations against a valued employee, they'd have to consider termination. That making unfounded claims of harassment was serious, that I needed to think very carefully about whether I wanted to pursue this further. I left that meeting shaking, not just angry, scared, because they were going to fire me for reporting harassment. They were protecting Mark and making me the villain. That night I was lying in bed replaying the meeting in my head, feeling helpless and furious, when I remembered something. 2 weeks earlier, Patricia had left me a voice note. Or not left me a voice note exactly. She'd called my number by accident and the voicemail had picked up. I'd gotten this 3-minute recording of what was clearly a conversation she was having with someone else about something I wasn't supposed to hear. At the time, I'd listened to it, realized it was a mistake, and just saved it without thinking much about it. People butt dial. It happens. But now I pulled up my voicemail and listened again. Patricia's voice, clear as day. She was talking to someone, probably another HR person or maybe legal, and she was discussing my complaint, my harassment complaint, the one I'd filed a week before that voicemail. She laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Just stonewall her. She'll give up eventually. They always do. Mark's too valuable to lose over some girl claiming he made her uncomfortable." The other person said something I couldn't make out. Patricia responded, "We'll go through the motions. Do the interview. Document that we investigated. Then tell her we found nothing and warn her about making false claims. That usually shuts them up." More muffled conversation. Then Patricia again. "And if she pushes it, we'll start documenting performance issues. Build a case for termination unrelated to the complaint. Easy." The voicemail ended. I sat there in the dark holding my phone, listening to the HR director of my company explicitly laying out a plan to ignore my harassment complaint and retaliate against me for making it. I had 1 week until my follow-up meeting with Patricia, the one where she'd officially close my complaint and probably put me on some kind of probation. I spent that week preparing differently than I had for the first meeting. I researched, found out my state was a one-party consent state for recordings, meaning I could legally record conversations I was part of without telling the other person. I downloaded a recording app, tested it, made sure it worked. The morning of the meeting, I started recording before I even walked into the conference room. The app ran in the background on my phone, which I placed face down on the table like I was just setting it aside. Patricia went through her script. The investigation was complete. No evidence of harassment. Concerns about my performance and motivation for making these claims. Strong suggestion that I drop this and focus on improving my work. I let her finish. Then I said, "That's interesting, because I have evidence that contradicts what you're saying." Patricia got this tight smile. "We've reviewed your evidence. It doesn't support your claims." I said, "I'm not talking about that evidence. I'm talking about this." I pulled out my phone, opened my voicemail, and hit play on the accidental recording from 2 weeks earlier. Patricia's voice filled the conference room, her laugh, her plan to stonewall me, her acknowledgement that Mark was the problem but too valuable to lose, her strategy to retaliate against me if I pushed back. I watched her face drain of color. She reached for the phone like she was going to grab it. I pulled it back. "It's already backed up in multiple places. You can't delete it." She tried to recover, said it was taken out of context, that I'd misunderstood a private conversation, that recording someone without consent was illegal. I said, "One-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm part of. And for the record, this current meeting, I'm recording this too." The look on her face was something I'll remember forever. Pure panic mixed with rage, mixed with the realization that she'd been caught. Things went from bad to unhinged pretty quickly after that. Patricia tried to threaten me, said I'd stolen company property by recording her, that I'd violated privacy policies. I pointed out that she'd called my voicemail. That wasn't theft. That was her mistake. She tried to bargain, asked what I wanted, suggested maybe there'd been miscommunication. Maybe we could resolve this internally. I told her I wanted her to do her job, investigate the harassment complaint properly, hold Mark accountable, and stop retaliating against me. She said she'd need to consult with legal. I said fine, I'd wait. And while she was consulting with legal, maybe they'd want to hear the recordings too. I left the meeting and went straight to an employment lawyer. Brought the recordings, brought all my documentation. The lawyer's eyes lit up. This was a clear-cut case. Harassment ignored, retaliation, conspiracy to terminate me for reporting, all documented in the company's own HR director's voice. The lawyer sent a letter to the company, detailed the evidence, outlined the case, suggested they might want to settle before this became public and involved the EEOC. The company moved fast. Within a week, Patricia was fired. They called it a resignation, but everyone knew. Mark was terminated. No resignation option for him. Just walked out immediately. The company offered me a settlement, 6 months' salary, agreement that they'd provide neutral references, legal fees covered. My lawyer negotiated it up to 9 months' salary, plus an agreement that my personnel file would be cleared of any negative performance documentation from the period after I'd filed the complaint. I took it. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I couldn't stay in a company that had tried to protect a harasser and destroy the person reporting it. The culture was rotten. Patricia and Mark were gone, but how many others were still there who'd think the same way? I left on my terms, with a settlement check and clean references and the satisfaction of knowing I'd won. But that wasn't even the most satisfying part. The most satisfying part was the email I got 3 months later from a woman named Jennifer, who'd just started in my old department. She'd heard through the workplace grapevine what had happened. She wanted to thank me. Because now, when she'd reported her own issue with a different supervisor, HR had actually investigated, actually taken it seriously, actually held someone accountable. The company had learned, the hard way, that ignoring harassment and retaliating against victims was expensive and legally dangerous, that accidental voicemails could destroy careers, that underestimating the person you're trying to silence could backfire spectacularly. Patricia's at another company now. I checked her LinkedIn once out of curiosity. She's in some HR role at a mid-sized firm. I almost felt bad for her new employer. Almost. Mark's profile says he's doing consulting. Make of that what you will. And me? I'm at a better company now. Better culture, better leadership, better HR that actually does their job. And every single interaction I have with HR. I keep documentation, I save emails, I take notes with timestamps, not because I'm paranoid, but because I learned that when institutions decide to protect themselves instead of doing what's right, you need evidence. And sometimes that evidence comes from their own careless mistakes, an accidental voicemail, their own voice admitting to exactly what they're trying to deny. Every HR meeting since then has been very, very professional, because nothing keeps people honest quite like knowing you're the person who took down an HR director with her own recorded words. Revenge doesn't always happen in corporate boardrooms. Sometimes it's more personal, and honestly, way more satisfying. Jason and I dated for 2 years, met through mutual friends, had that honeymoon phase where everything felt easy and right, then settled into what I thought was a solid relationship. Turned out I was wrong about the solid part. He cheated. I found out the way people usually do, through a text message he forgot to delete and a gut feeling I couldn't shake. Confronted him. He admitted it. Gave me the standard excuses about how it didn't mean anything, how he'd made a mistake, how he wanted to work on us. I didn't. I left. Moved my stuff out of his apartment over a weekend while he was visiting his parents. Clean break, or so I thought. The first few months after the breakup were normal enough. Awkward when we ran into each other since we lived in a small town. Uncomfortable silences when mutual friends tried to hang out with both of us. The usual post-relationship weirdness. I was moving on, dating casually, focusing on my job, getting my life back. Then I started noticing things. Friends getting weird around me. People I'd known for years suddenly cold or distant. Invitations to group events stopped coming. I'd walk into a room and conversation would halt. That thing where you know people were just talking about you. I finally cornered my friend Amy and asked what was going on. She looked uncomfortable, didn't want to tell me. I pushed. She admitted that Jason had been telling people things about me. Bad things. That I'd been abusive during our relationship. Manipulative. That I'd even gotten violent with him, which was completely insane because I'd never laid a hand on him in anger in my entire life. I was stunned. These were complete lies, total fabrications, but people were believing him. In a small town, rumors spread fast and stick hard. My reputation was being destroyed by someone who cheated on me and was apparently so bitter about me leaving that he'd decided to rewrite history. I tried to defend myself, told people the truth, but it's hard to fight whisper campaigns. Jason's lies were more interesting than my truth. People love drama, and the abusive ex-girlfriend narrative was apparently too juicy to fact-check. 6 months after our breakup, I heard Jason had gotten engaged. Her name was Melissa. I'd seen her around town a few times. She seemed nice, sweet, the kind of person who probably believed the best in people. I felt bad for her. She had no idea what she was getting into. But that wasn't even the worst part. Jason didn't stop spreading lies just because he'd moved on. If anything, he escalated, told Melissa I'd stalked him after the breakup. Showed up at his apartment, sent threatening messages, all complete fiction. Melissa apparently believed him because she gave me these wary looks the few times we crossed paths, like I might attack her in the grocery store. I'd had enough. I couldn't let this continue, not just for my own reputation, but because Melissa deserved to know who she was about to marry. So I started compiling evidence, text messages. I had 2 years worth of them. I'd never deleted our conversation thread because I'm terrible about phone storage management, and it turned out that negligence was about to pay off. I went through everything, screenshots of the important parts, his apologies after I'd caught him cheating, messages where he admitted he'd lied to me, angry rants when I wouldn't take him back, calling me names that definitely didn't sound like someone who was the victim of abuse, screenshots of him begging me to reconsider the breakup, saying he'd change, he'd do anything, he couldn't live without me. Then there were the messages to mutual friends that people had forwarded me. Jason admitting he'd made up stories because he was angry I'd left. Jason laughing about how people believed whatever he told them. Jason strategizing about how to make me look bad so no one would take my side. I organized it all chronologically, put together a document that told the real story of our relationship, not from my perspective with editorial commentary, just his own words, his own admissions, his own contradictions to the lies he was currently spreading. I sent it to Melissa, all of it, with a simple message that said, "I'm not who he says I am, but he is exactly who these texts show. You deserve to know the truth before you marry him." Then I waited. Honestly, wasn't sure what would happen. She might delete it without reading. She might show it to Jason and he'd spin some new lie. She might believe him over evidence. People do that sometimes when they're in love or invested in a relationship. Radio silence for 3 days. I didn't hear anything. Didn't see any reaction. Started to think maybe she just ignored the whole thing. Then she called me. I saw her name on my phone and almost didn't answer. But I did. And we talked for 2 hours. She'd had doubts. That was the first thing she told me. Jason's stories about me had never quite added up. The way he talked about the relationship versus the timeline of how quickly he'd moved on. Little inconsistencies that had bothered her, but she'd pushed aside because she wanted to believe him. The text confirmed what her gut had been telling her, that Jason was a liar, that his version of our relationship was fiction, that if he'd lie about me, he'd lie about anything. She asked me questions about the cheating, about the breakup, about whether there was anything in his story that was true. I was honest, told her what had actually happened. No embellishment, no revenge narrative, just facts. By the end of the call, she was crying, not because she was sad about losing Jason, because she was relieved. She'd been planning to marry someone who'd built their entire relationship on lies about his ex, who'd manipulated her perception of reality, who'd isolated her from the truth. The wedding was off within a week. Melissa called it off publicly, didn't give Jason a chance to control the narrative or save face, just announced they were done and gave back the ring. Jason tried to spin it as me destroying his happiness, told people I'd sabotaged his engagement out of jealousy, that I couldn't stand to see him happy, that this proved how obsessive and vindictive I was. But this time, people weren't buying it. Because Melissa was talking, telling people what she'd found out, showing them the same texts I'd sent her, confirming that Jason had lied about me, lied about our relationship, and tried to manipulate her into believing a completely false narrative. The Whisper campaign reversed. Suddenly, people were questioning everything Jason had said, apologizing to me for believing him, asking why they'd never thought to verify his stories. And here's where it gets absurd. Melissa and I became friends. Actually friends. We started meeting for coffee, comparing notes on Jason's behavior, laughing about the lies he'd told both of us, finding comfort in shared experience with the same manipulative ex. She thanked me regularly for saving her from marrying him, said the texts I'd sent were the wake-up call she needed, that she'd been ignoring red flags because she wanted the relationship to work, but seeing his own words laid out made it impossible to deny who he really was. Jason is still single as far as I know, still trying to date in our small town, but his reputation is shot. People know he's a liar now. Women warn each other about him. The lies he spread about me backfired spectacularly once the truth came out. He tried to confront me once, showed up at my work. Security escorted him out, but not before he could yell about how I'd ruined his life. I just looked at him and said, "I didn't ruin anything. I just showed your fiancé your own words." That's the thing about liars. They forget that evidence exists, that text messages don't disappear, that their own words can come back to haunt them. Jason spent months building a false narrative about me, never considering that I had proof of who he actually was. The best revenge wasn't anything dramatic. It was just the truth, his truth, in his own words, delivered to someone who needed to see it. Melissa is engaged again now, to someone who actually deserves her, someone who doesn't need to lie about his ex to look good. She invited me to the wedding. I'm going. It's in 3 months. Jason heard about it somehow. Sent me a message saying I'd stolen his fiancée, and now I was rubbing it in his face by befriending her. I didn't respond. There's nothing to say to someone who's that committed to being the victim of his own lies. My reputation in town is fine now. Better than fine. People know what happened. They know Jason lied. They know I had the receipts to prove it. There's a certain respect that comes with that, with standing up for yourself and not letting someone rewrite your history. Would things have been different if I'd just let the lies go? Maybe. Maybe Jason would have married Melissa, and eventually his true nature would have come out anyway. Or maybe she would have spent years with someone who gaslit her and manipulated her the way he'd tried to manipulate everyone's perception of me. I don't regret sending those texts. I regret that I had to. I regret that Jason's ego and bitterness made him try to destroy my reputation rather than just moving on. But I don't regret exposing the truth. People sometimes ask if I worry about future relationships, if having a publicly messy situation with an ex will scare people off. I figure if someone's scared off by the fact that I defended myself against lies with evidence, they probably weren't right for me anyway. Jason's still out there, still lying, still trying to rewrite history. But now, no one believes him, and that's better than any revenge I could have planned. Public humiliation can be therapeutic, especially when the audience is people who really need to know the truth. Jen had been my best friend since college, 15 years of friendship. We met freshman year in a terrible dorm with paper-thin walls and bonded over our mutual hatred of our roommates. After that, we were inseparable. Late-night study sessions that turned into life philosophy discussions, road trips, bridesmaid at each other's important events, the person I called first with good news or bad, that kind of friendship where you assume it's permanent, like family you actually chose. Then about 6 months ago, things started changing. Subtle at first, Jen would cancel plans last minute. She'd seem distracted when we did hang out, checking her phone constantly. She'd make these weird comments about my fiancé Dan, asking questions about our relationship that felt less like friendly interest and more like fishing for information. How was he treating me? Did I think we were really compatible? Had I noticed any red flags? I brushed it off, figured maybe she was going through something and being weird about it. Jen had always been a little dramatic. I gave her space, assumed she'd talk when she was ready. I found out what was actually going on when I borrowed her laptop. Mine had died and I needed to send an urgent email for work. Jen said, sure, just use hers. Password is the same as always. I opened it up and Facebook was already logged in. Her messages were right there on the screen. I wasn't trying to snoop, But Dan's name caught my eye. A message thread between Jen and my fiancé. I told myself not to look, that it was probably nothing, that they were probably just coordinating a surprise for me or something innocent. I looked anyway, and I wish I hadn't, or maybe I'm glad I did. I still don't know. Months of messages. Going back almost as far as when Jen's behavior had started changing. Flirting, inside jokes, late night conversations. They'd been talking constantly, more than I talked to either of them individually. The messages started friendly enough, Dan asking Jen's advice about anniversary gifts, Jen offering suggestions, normal friend stuff. Then they got more personal. Dan complaining about stress at work, Jen sympathizing, offering support, still relatively innocent. But then the tone shifted. Dan making comments about how easy Jen was to talk to, how he felt like she understood him better than most people. Jen responding that she felt the same way, that she looked forward to their conversations. The flirting got more explicit, comments about each other's appearance, jokes with sexual undertones, Dan saying he'd been thinking about Jen. Jen saying he shouldn't say things like that but clearly enjoying it. Then came the plans, meeting for coffee when I was at work, lunch dates they didn't mention to me, a concert they'd gone to together, which Dan had told me was a work event, and Jen had said she was busy that night. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how they talked about me, like I was an obstacle, a complication in whatever they were building. Jen calling me controlling, Dan agreeing, saying I didn't understand him like Jen did. Discussions about whether I'd notice if they spent more time together, strategizing about how to keep their friendship from me. They hadn't physically cheated yet. The messages made that clear. They were building up to it, dancing around it. But the emotional affair was explicit and ongoing. My best friend and my fiancé had been conducting a relationship behind my back for months. I sat there staring at the laptop screen, feeling like the floor had disappeared. These were the two people I trusted most in the world, and they'd been betraying me together, discussing me like I was the problem, like I was in the way of something that should be allowed to happen. I took screenshots, didn't even think about it, just started capturing everything, printed them out later at a FedEx because I didn't want this evidence only existing digitally where it could be deleted or denied. Jen's birthday dinner was in 3 days. She'd been planning it for weeks. Fancy restaurant downtown. 20 guests, her parents coming in from out of state. She'd asked me to give a speech, best friend toast. I'd already written something heartfelt about our years of friendship. I rewrote it. The dinner was exactly as elaborate as Jen had wanted. Private room at an expensive Italian place, decorations, a custom cake, everyone dressed up. Dan was there, sitting next to me, holding my hand under the table like nothing was wrong. Jen kept looking at him across the table, little glances she probably thought were subtle. Speeches started after dinner. Jen's mum went first with embarrassing childhood stories. Her college roommate did a funny one about their dorm years. Then Jen looked at me expectantly. My turn. I stood up, had my printed screenshots in my purse, pulled them out, started reading. The table went quiet immediately, not the good kind of quiet where people are listening to a heartfelt toast. The uncomfortable kind where everyone knows something is wrong, but doesn't know what yet. I read the messages chronologically, started with the early flirting, Dan's comment about how Jen understood him, Jen's response, then the escalation, the plans to meet up, the lies they'd told me, then the discussions about me, Jen calling me controlling, Dan saying I was too demanding, both of them joking about how oblivious I was. Dan tried to leave, actually stood up and headed for the door. I was standing near the exit, blocked him, said, "Sit down, we're not done." He sat. He looked like he might throw up. Good. Jen was crying, saying they were just jokes, that I was taking things out of context, that it didn't mean anything. I asked the table loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Do these sound like jokes to you?" I read more. The message where they discussed going to that concert together, where Dan had told me it was a work thing, where Jen had told me she was too busy to hang out with me that same night. I read the date stamps, showed that they'd been lying to me in coordination. Jen's other friends were staring at her in horror. Her parents looked mortified. Jen's mom was crying. Dan was just sitting there with his head in his hands. I read one more, the most recent one, from 2 days ago. Jen telling Dan that she was glad I'd be at the birthday dinner so they could see each other. Dan responding that it was getting harder to pretend. Jen saying maybe they should stop pretending soon. Then I put the papers down, said, "Happy birthday, Jen. Hope you enjoy your dinner." And I left, stuck her with the bill for the whole thing. 20 people at an expensive restaurant. Fitting. Dan followed me out, tried to explain. I told him we were done, that I'd moved my stuff out of our apartment that weekend, that he could explain to his family why the engagement was off, that I never wanted to see him again. Ended the engagement that night. Called his mum the next day and told her what happened. She cried, apologized for her son. I told her it wasn't her fault. Lost a best friend and a fiancé in one evening. Two of the most important people in my life. Gone. By choice. My choice. Because I wasn't going to stay in relationships with people who'd betrayed me like that. Jen tried to reach out. Texts, calls, emails. I blocked everything. She sent mutual friends to try to talk to me. I told them what happened, showed them the screenshots. They stopped trying to reconcile us. She's still trying to explain it away, apparently. According to people who know both of us, she's claiming I overreacted, that they really were just friends, that the messages looked worse than they were. But she's had to change her story multiple times because people keep asking her to explain specific messages, and she can't. Her birthday dinner became the story everyone in our friend group knows, how I stood up and read her messages in front of everyone. Some people think it was harsh, that I humiliated her publicly. Maybe I did, but she'd been humiliating me privately for months. At least I gave her the dignity of truth. I've moved on. New apartment, therapy twice a week, working on trusting people again, which is harder than I expected. 15 years of friendship conditioned me to trust Jen completely. Finding out she was capable of that kind of betrayal makes me question my judgment about everyone. Dan tried to get back together, showed up at my new place, said Jen had pursued him, that he'd made a mistake but nothing physical had happened, that we could work through it. I told him that emotional cheating was still cheating, that planning to betray me was the same as doing it, that I deserved better than someone who discussed me like an obstacle with my best friend. I heard through mutual friends that Dan and Jen tried to date after everything fell apart. Made sense. They'd blown up their lives for each other. Might as well see it through. Lasted about 6 weeks. Turns out when the thrill of sneaking around is gone and you're just two people who betrayed someone you both supposedly cared about, there's not much foundation there. Jen's reputation never recovered. Small social circle. Everyone knows everyone. The story of what she did spread. People who weren't even at that dinner heard about it. She's had a hard time maintaining friendship since. Turns out when you spectacularly betray your best friend of 15 years, other people wonder if they're next. I don't take pleasure in that. Honestly, I'm not vindictive enough to enjoy watching her struggle, but I'm also not sympathetic enough to feel bad about it. She made choices. Those choices had consequences. That's just how life works. The therapy helps. So does knowing that everyone knows the truth. That I didn't suffer in silence or let them rewrite the narrative. That I stood up in that restaurant and made sure no one could pretend it was a misunderstanding or an overreaction. Would I do it differently if I could go back? Maybe handle the confrontation more privately? I don't know. The public call-out felt necessary at the time, felt like the only way to make sure the truth came out before they could spin it. 15 years of friendship ended with printed screenshots at a birthday dinner. Not how I imagined it would go, but betrayal rarely happens the way you imagine. I'm rebuilding, making new friends, learning to trust again. It's slow, but it's happening, and I'm doing it without people who discuss me behind my back while smiling to my face. That's worth something, and if you think friend betrayals are bad, try dealing with a neighbor who weaponizes community rules against you. Dale was our HOA president, had been for 6 years, the kind of person who ran for the position not because he cared about the community, but because he loved having power over people. Petty power, sure, but power nonetheless. He'd fine you for leaving your Christmas lights up past January 1st. Send violation notices if your grass was 2 inches too tall. Walk the neighborhood with a measuring tape and a clipboard like he was conducting a military inspection. Most people just paid the fines and moved on. Easier than fighting. That's what Dale counted on. The path of least resistance leading straight to his power trip. I'd lived in the neighborhood for 3 years without major issues. Kept my lawn maintained, followed the rules, paid my dues on time. I wasn't trying to make waves, just wanted to live in my house peacefully. Then I decided to paint my front door. The existing paint was chipping and faded. I wanted a fresh coat. I checked the HOA guidelines, found an approved color list, picked a nice blue that was explicitly listed as acceptable, filled out the architectural modification form, submitted it to the HOA board, got written approval 2 weeks later, painted my door on a Saturday, looked great, brightened up the whole front of the house. Monday morning, there was a violation notice on my door, $500 fine for unauthorized exterior modification. I called Dale immediately, told him I had approval. He said I'd submitted the wrong form, that I needed the exterior paint modification form, not the general architectural modification form. I pulled up the HOA website. There was no separate exterior paint modification form, just the one I'd submitted. I told Dale this. He said the website was outdated, that the forms had been updated last year, that I should have checked with him personally before proceeding. I asked him to send me the correct form. He said he'd email it, never did. I asked again. He said he'd look into it. Weeks went by. The fine stayed on my account, accumulating late fees. Then Dale started building a case against me. Suddenly, I was getting violation notices for things that had never been problems before. My trash cans were visible from the street on non-collection days, even though they were in the same spot they'd been for 3 years. My garden decorations were too numerous. My mailbox needed repainting. Every notice came with a fine. Every fine I disputed. Every dispute was denied. Dale was creating a paper trail of violations, building what he called a pattern of non-compliance. He started talking at HOA meetings about problem homeowners who refused to follow community standards. Never said my name, but everyone knew who he meant. Then I got the letter. Official HOA letterhead. Statement that due to my pattern of violations and refusal to comply with community standards, the board would be voting on whether to recommend eviction proceedings. Eviction. From a house I owned, over a door I'd painted an approved color and some trash cans. I knew why this was happening. It wasn't about the door or the trash cans or any actual violations. It was about my parking spot. I had one of the covered spots in the community lot. Better shade than the uncovered spots. Dale had an uncovered spot. He'd asked me multiple times if I wanted to trade. I'd said no. My spot came with my unit. I'd paid for it. So Dale had decided to make my life difficult until I either traded spots or moved out. Childish, petty, absolutely in character for someone who measured grass height with a ruler. I was preparing to fight this legally, had contacted a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, was gathering documentation. Then I noticed something. Dale's car, black Lexus with a custom plate, hard to miss. It was parked at the same house every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Same time, around 2 p.m., would be there for 2 to 3 hours. The house wasn't Dale's. Dale lived on Maple Street. This house was on Oak, 3 blocks over. I got curious, looked up the address in the community directory. House belonged to a woman named Karen, divorced, lived alone. Not Dale's wife, whose name was Patricia. I started paying attention, took photos over 3 weeks, time stamped. Dale's car in Karen's driveway, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons like clockwork. Sometimes his car would still be there at 6 p.m. when I drove past on my way home from work. I did more digging, found Karen's Facebook. Not super active, but there were some posts. Check-ins at restaurants on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, often tagged with Dale, comments from friends with heart emojis and cute couple messages. Dale was having an affair, regular, scheduled, brazen affair with a woman in our own neighborhood, and his wife, Patricia, seemed to have no idea. She was active in the community, volunteered at neighborhood events, was in our neighborhood Facebook group where she posted about bake sales and yard sales and lost pets. The HOA meeting where Dale planned to push my eviction vote was scheduled for Thursday evening. I had documentation ready to fight it, letters from my lawyer, evidence that I'd followed all proper procedures, proof that Dale's additional violations were either fabricated or selectively enforced. But I decided to go a different route. The day before the meeting, Wednesday afternoon, I posted everything to the neighborhood Facebook group. The photos of Dale's car at Karen's house, the timestamps, 3 weeks of documented visits, Karen's Facebook check-ins that corresponded with Dale's car being at her place. A simple caption. Interesting how our HOA president finds time for these regular afternoon visits, while claiming he's too busy to review my door paint approval properly. I didn't explicitly say affair. Didn't have to. The photos told the story clearly enough. The neighborhood group exploded, comments coming in faster than I could read them. Patricia, Dale's wife, was in that group. So was Karen's ex-husband, who apparently still followed neighborhood updates because of custody arrangements for their kids. Dale started damage control immediately, posted a comment saying Karen was a friend who needed help with home maintenance, that he was there in his capacity as HOA president helping a community member. Weak excuse. Nobody was buying it. Patricia commented, just 3 words. We need to talk. Then she went offline. Karen's ex-husband started commenting, asking if the HOA had rules about board members having inappropriate relationships with homeowners, suggesting this was a conflict of interest. Other people piled on, questions about whether Dale had been giving Karen favorable treatment, whether her violations had been overlooked while he targeted others. And here's where it gets absurd. People started posting their own stories. Homeowners who'd been fined for minor things, while noticing that certain houses never seemed to get violations. Patterns emerging of Dale playing favorites and targeting people he didn't like. My situation wasn't unique. I was just the one who'd finally documented something that took him down. The Thursday HOA meeting was cancelled. Emergency board meeting instead. Closed session. Dale resigned that night. Send an email to the board citing personal reasons. The board accepted it immediately. Patricia filed for divorce within 2 weeks. I know because she posted about it in the neighborhood group. Thanked everyone for their support during a difficult time. Several people commented that they'd suspected something was off. Karen kept a low profile, stopped coming to neighborhood events, eventually listed her house for sale. Moved out about 3 months later. The new HOA president was a retired accountant named Margaret. Thorough. Fair. Actually interested in community well-being instead of power. She reviewed my case personally, looked at my door paint approval, looked at the violation Dale had issued, looked at the non-existent form he'd claimed I needed. She sent me an email apologizing for the confusion and confirming that I'd followed all proper procedures, suggested I might want to withdraw my dispute of the fine voluntarily now that the situation had been reviewed and resolved. Translation: we'll pretend this never happened if you don't make a thing of it. I withdrew the dispute. The fine disappeared from my account. So did all the other violations Dale had manufactured. Clean slate. Dale moved out last month, put his house on the market, took a loss selling it quickly. Guess he wanted out of the neighborhood where everyone knew what he'd done. Patricia kept the house in the divorce, according to neighborhood gossip. She still lives there. We wave when we see each other. Never discussed what happened. Don't need to. My door is still beautifully blue, exactly the shade I wanted. Approved color, proper process, no violations. The new HOA runs smoothly. Violations are for actual problems, not petty grievances. Fines are reasonable and fairly applied. Turns out when you remove a power-hungry tyrant and replace them with someone who actually wants to help, things improve dramatically. People still talk about what happened. The dramatic fall of Dale the HOA dictator, brought down by his own affair posted to Facebook. Some people think I was vindictive, that I could have handled it privately. Maybe. But Dale had been publicly humiliating me with violation notices and eviction threats. Turnabout felt fair. Besides, I didn't fabricate anything, didn't lie, just posted photos of his car at another woman's house on a regular schedule. If that destroyed his marriage and his position, that's on him for having the affair, not on me for documenting it. The lawyer I'd contacted about the eviction sent me a final bill. Minimal charges since we never had to actually fight it. Included a note that said sometimes the best legal strategy is good old-fashioned exposure. He wasn't wrong. You know, we've been through workplace nightmares, family implosions, romantic disasters, but some betrayals cut deeper because they come from the person who shares your life every single day. Michael traveled for work. That's what he told me. That's what I believed for 8 years. Sales manager for a medical supply company. Always on the road, Tuesday through Thursday most weeks, sometimes longer if there was a big client or a conference. It was just part of our life, part of the rhythm of our marriage. We'd been together for 10 years, married for 8. Met at a friend's wedding, did the whole courtship thing, got married in a small ceremony with close family and friends. Good marriage as far as I could tell. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our plans for the future, talking about buying a bigger house, maybe starting a family soon. Normal married couple stuff. Then I found the second phone. It fell out of his gym bag while I was doing laundry. Michael had gotten home from one of his trips late the night before, dumped his stuff in the bedroom, and crashed. I was tidying up the next morning, grabbed his gym bag to throw his workout clothes in the wash, and this phone just tumbled out onto the floor. Not his regular phone. This was a cheap burner, the kind you buy at a convenience store with prepaid minutes. But it was well used, scratched, the kind of wear that comes from being carried around regularly. I stood there holding it, trying to figure out why my husband would have a second phone. Maybe it was a work thing. Maybe the company issued burner phones for client calls or something. But that didn't make sense. His company gave him a work cell. I'd seen it. This was something else. I charged it. Told myself I was just being thorough, that there'd be some reasonable explanation, that I was probably overreacting. The phone powered on. No password. Just opened right up to the home screen. There were 2 apps with notification badges, messages and photos, hundreds of unread items. I opened messages first. The most recent thread was with someone named Claire. I started scrolling. Love you, miss you, can't wait to see you next week. The kids are asking about you. Normal couple texts, domestic, intimate, the kids. I scrolled further. Photos attached to messages. A woman, pretty, dark hair, smiling at the camera. 2 children, a boy and a girl, maybe 6 and 4 years old. Birthday parties, school events, family dinners, all time-stamped within our marriage. The most recent from last week, while Michael had been on one of his work trips. I opened the Photos app, hundreds of pictures, Claire and the kids, Michael with the kids, all of them together looking like a normal, happy family. The boy had Michael's eyes, the same shaped face. There was no question these were his children. And here's where it gets absurd. I started checking dates, cross-referencing the photos with my own calendar. The times Michael was in these family photos matched exactly with his work travel. The weeks he told me he was visiting the regional office in Henderson. The long weekends he said he had client dinners. Henderson. I pulled up the photos' location data. They were all taken in Henderson, a town 90 miles away where Michael supposedly had a regional office. I called his company, asked to be transferred to the Henderson office. The receptionist said there was no Henderson office. Their regional offices were in Portland and Sacramento. Henderson was just a client site Michael visited occasionally. He didn't have an office there. He had a second family, a whole other life. Claire and 2 kids living in Henderson, thinking they had a normal relationship with a man who traveled for work. Me living here, thinking I had a normal marriage with a man who traveled for work. We were both right and both completely wrong. I sat on this information for 2 days, trying to process it, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to confront Michael immediately. Part of me wanted to burn his stuff and change the locks. Part of me just wanted to pretend I'd never found the phone. But Claire deserved to know. Those kids deserve better than a father who was lying to everyone. So I called her, used the number from the burner phone. She answered on the 3rd ring. Cheerful voice, probably thought it was Michael calling from his other phone. I said, "Is this Claire?" Pause. "Yes. Who's this?" I said, "My name is Jennifer. I'm Michael's wife." The worst conversation of my life. 2 women, both devastated, both realizing in real time that we'd been betrayed by the same man in the exact same way. Claire thought Michael was divorced. He'd told her his ex-wife lived out of state, that he had to travel for work to manage accounts here, that he was building a life with her and the kids. She had no idea about me. I had no idea about her. We were both victims of an incredibly elaborate, sustained deception. We talked for 3 hours, compared stories, timelines. The lies matched up perfectly. When he told me he was in Henderson for work, he was actually with Claire and the kids. When he told Claire he was traveling to visit his sick mother, he was actually home with me. He'd constructed this entire double life with precision timing and consistent lies. Claire was shattered. So was I. But underneath the devastation there was this growing anger. At Michael, obviously, but also at the situation, at being lied to for years, at finding out our entire relationship was a performance. We decided to meet in person, halfway point between our 2 cities, a coffee shop off the highway. Surreal experience, sitting across from your husband's other partner, comparing notes on the man you both thought you knew. Claire showed me pictures of the kids. They were beautiful, innocent victims in all of this. They thought Michael was their dad who worked hard and traveled a lot but always came home to them. They had no idea he had a whole other home. We made a plan. We'd confront him together, united front. No opportunity for him to spin different stories to each of us. No chance for him to manipulate the narrative. Michael was supposed to come home that Thursday, told me he'd be back by dinner, probably told Claire he was leaving for a work trip. We waited at my house. Claire drove up. We sat in the living room like we were staging an intervention. When Michael walked in, he saw both of us sitting there. The color drained from his face. He knew immediately that everything had fallen apart. He tried to explain, started talking fast, said he'd made mistakes, that things had gotten complicated, that he'd never meant for any of this to happen. Classic lines from someone who's been caught. Claire cut him off, asked him directly, "Did you lie to me about being divorced?" He hesitated. That hesitation was answer enough. But he said yes, admitted he was still married. I asked him directly, "How long have you been with Claire?" He said 7 years. 7 years of lying to both of us. 7 years of maintaining 2 complete lives, 2 families, 2 sets of obligations. 2 women who thought they were in committed, honest relationships. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was when Claire asked about the kids, asked if he'd ever planned to tell them the truth. Michael broke down, started crying, said he loved those kids, that he was trying to do right by everyone, that he didn't know how to fix this. I said, "You can't fix this. You destroyed 2 families. You don't get to cry about it now." Claire agreed, said she was done, that she'd supported him for years, built a life with him, raised his children, all while being lied to every single day. She was filing for divorce, wanted full custody, wanted child support, wanted him out of their lives except for the legal minimum. I said the same. Divorce, no reconciliation, no therapy, no second chances. Just done. Michael begged. Both of us. Said he'd do anything. Go to counseling. Be honest. Choose one of us. That last one was particularly insulting. Like we were options he could select between now that he'd been caught. Neither of us gave him forgiveness. We'd both been betrayed too completely for that. Claire left, drove back to Henderson to figure out how to explain to her kids why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore. I stayed in the house that suddenly felt like a stage set for a play I hadn't known I was performing in. Michael moved out that week. I filed for divorce immediately. Claire did too. We've stayed in contact, supporting each other through the legal process, comparing lawyers, sharing resources. It's bizarre having this bond with someone who used to be a complete stranger, but now understands exactly what you're going through, because you're going through it together. The kids are the ones I feel worst for. They didn't ask for any of this. They just wanted a dad. Now they're dealing with divorce, custody arrangements, the knowledge that their father lied to them their entire lives. Claire's in therapy with them, trying to help them process it. Michael's paying child support to both families now. The court wasn't sympathetic to his situation. 2 families means 2 sets of obligations. He's living in a studio apartment, alone. Lost both relationships, damaged relationship with his kids, reputation destroyed among everyone who knows what happened. Claire posted about it on Facebook, not vindictively, just honestly. Said she was going through a divorce after discovering her partner had been living a double life. People she knew started commenting, sharing their own stories, offering support. Word spread. People from Michael's work found out. His company didn't fire him, but he's definitely not getting promoted anytime soon. Hard to trust someone who successfully maintained a massive deception for 7 years. If he could lie that well to 2 families, what else might he lie about? I'm rebuilding, therapy, focusing on work, figuring out who I am outside of a marriage that was apparently fiction. It's hard. 8 years of memories are all contaminated now. Every trip, every absence, every excuse was a lie. How do you process that? Claire's doing the same. We talk once a week, sometimes more. It helps to have someone who gets it, who doesn't need the whole explanation because she lived it too. Michael keeps trying to reach out, wants to apologize properly, wants to explain. I don't care. There's no explanation that makes this okay. No apology that fixes 8 years of systematic deception. Sometimes karma doesn't need our help. Sometimes it just needs time. Michael built this elaborate double life thinking he could maintain it forever. Then a phone fell out of a gym bag and the whole thing collapsed. He's alone now. Both families gone, reputation ruined, living in a tiny apartment and splitting his paycheck between child support and alimony. That's the consequence of his choices. Claire and I didn't destroy his life. He did that himself. We just stopped participating in the lie. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're officially part of the night crew, the people who know that the wildest stories aren't in movies, they're happening in apartments and offices and family dinners all around us right now. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the truth always finds a way out, even if it takes a borrowed laptop, a misplaced phone, or one accidentally attached spreadsheet. Lock your screens, trust your gut, and I'll see you in the next one.